Hi loves, today we're going to be discussing three of the members of Judd Apatow's frat pack. We're going to be discussing Jonah Hill, James Franco, and Seth Rogen. And just so you know, they all are mentioned with each other throughout the video, but the video is mainly broken into three parts to discuss them each individually. The first part will be about Jonah Hill, the second part about James Franco, and then the third part about Seth Rogen. This video is a compilation video. Videos on this channel are so long, you'll never have to hear your own thoughts again, but I will leave linked in the description box and pinned comment my main channel, Coffee and Cults, where I have lots of other videos discussing topics like this. I'll also leave links to the sources, my social media, and all of the other stuff you might need. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoy the video. Over the last 20 years, Jonah Hill has had a very successful Hollywood career. But almost 3 years ago, he disappeared from the spotlight in a swirl of controversy. From the beginning of Hill's career, he was known as someone not easy to work with, but as his star power rose, his behavior behind the scenes went from bad to worse. For years, when lesser-known actors and crew members spoke out about Hill's behavior, he'd publicly be defended by his very famous friends, many of which have their own controversial reputations. And then behind the scenes, there'd be a coordinated campaign to keep the stories and Hill's bad behavior out of the spotlight, employing cutthroat and ruthless Hollywood PR tactics. But then, in 2023, one of Jonah Hill's ex-girlfriends spoke out about how she'd been treated by him, and she alleged that Hill had been controlling and emotionally abusive throughout their relationship. She even shared a list of restrictive demands Hill required if his ex wanted to maintain a relationship with him. To deal with the negative publicity and backlash, Jonah Hill seemed to take a leaf out of James Franco's book, one of his best friends. He then disappeared, and in his wake, he allegedly left an army of bots to do his dirty work and completely rewrite history. So that's what we're discussing today. Jonah Hill's horrendous behavior behind the scenes, the allegations against him, how he's about to return, and why he's allegedly one of the rudest people in all of Hollywood. Jonah Hill has rewritten his history a lot throughout his career in Hollywood, and next month, when he finally returns to the spotlight after being gone since early 2023, I think we'll see this trend continue. One of Jonah Hill's most successful rewrites is that of his Hollywood origin story, as outside of those people working in the industry and those people that follow the industry very closely, I don't think most people would know that he's not only a Nepo baby, but he attended the Nepo baby school, Crossroads, in Santa Monica, California. In fact, Jonah Hill went to two Nepo baby Hollywood schools. He originally went to the Brentwood School, which is, unsurprisingly, in Brentwood, California, and I'm sure a lot of people that, even if they don't know a lot about California and the LA area, have heard of Brentwood before because it is very, very exclusive, very expensive, and lots of stars live there, but also a lot of people who work in the industry or around the industry. A lot of people with a lot of money live there. The Brentwood School also has a lot of alumni who went on to be stars, or a lot of people who attended who were the kids of stars. The Schwarzenegger kids went there, Ben and Fred Savage went there, Jack Quaid went there, and also all of the members of Maroon 5 who, when they were at the Brentwood School, they formed the band Cars Flowers, which went on to later be evolved into Maroon 5, and put a pin in Maroon 5 because later in the video we'll talk about Adam Levine and his relationship not only with Jonah Hill but also with the Feldstein family in general, as Adam Levine, his family are extremely close to the Feldsteins and have been for decades and decades. And if you don't know a massive amount about Jonah Hill, you might think, who the fuck are the Feldsteins and why are you talking about them? Because Jonah Hill's real last name is Feldstein, or it was, as he originally dropped it just professionally from the beginning of his career, but he legally changed it about 3 years ago, the same time that he went through all of the controversy, the same time he kind of disappeared from Hollywood, and also the same time that he had his first child. So that probably might have more to do with it, as he might have had Hill be the last name of his kid, and it could have just been a coincidence that all the other stuff was happening at that time. He's been asked a few times in interviews about changing his last name, and he is always very, very rude to interviewers who do ask about this, and that's going to be a trend you're going to see throughout the video is, well, not only being rude to interviewers, but just being rude in general, especially on the sets of movies. But he has not really given any proper answer, because anytime that he is asked about it, he just shuts the interviewer down. There's especially one interview with the Jewish Chronicle and a journalist there where Jonah was very rude to the interviewer, and she actually put it all in the transcript. And she was quite well known for asking a lot of celebrities who were Jewish and had changed their name why they did it. People like Natalie Portman, who she's talked about changing her last name from Hirschlag because of the spelling and like branding. And then there are people like Jon Stewart, who he changed his name because he dropped the name of his biological father. And of course, there are people like Emilio Estevez, who actually Estevez is his family's real name. And he ended up keeping the family's real name because his dad, Martin Sheen, had been advised in his early career to change his name. And it's interesting there because Martin Sheen obviously has two sons, and Charlie Sheen did end up using his dad's kind of stage name as his stage name. And Emilio Estevez, I do think, like when I think back to like the late 90s and especially like the Mighty Ducks era, I feel like I constantly was seeing or hearing people very surprised that Coach Bombay, and obviously before that like Breakfast Club and stuff, was the brother of Charlie and the son of Martin Sheen. And I do think to some extent it does work today, even in the internet age where everything is just so easy to Google, because when I was doing research for this video, I constantly saw articles or like posts on message boards, and today I learned that people were so surprised that Jonah Hill was the brother of Beanie Feldstein, who does use their family's real last name. Jonah and his team have very much underplayed how successful Jonah's father, Rich Feldstein, was and how prominent he is in the entertainment industry. From the side of Jonah's team, you will see his father described as an accountant or sometimes as the on-road accountant for Guns N' Roses, but his father is an incredibly successful business manager in the entertainment industry, and he's on every single one of these lists that, you know, Variety and the Hollywood Reporter put out that have the top 50 top entertainment business managers. He's always on those annual lists, and he exclusively manages very high net worth individuals, people who are producers, directors, and all sorts in the entertainment field. But he is also incredibly wealthy and incredibly well connected. I mean, even if you just look at the school fees alone for his three children, it would be not far off 200,000 a year. So, I mean, that's like insane money, you know, not just like we're talking, oh, he did well for himself. It's that level of wealthy. So I mentioned the Brentwood School had a list of impressive alumni, but the Crossroads School that Jonah transferred to, their alumni list is absolutely insane. Gwyneth Paltrow went there, Kate Hudson, Jack Quaid actually, like Jonah, went to the Brentwood and then transferred. LeBron James sent his kids there. Maya Rudolph, Liv Tyler, the Deschanel sisters went there. The Apatow sisters went there. It is absolutely wild, the amount of celebrities and celebrities' kids who went to Crossroads. And it's one of these schools where the kids call the teachers by their first names, and it's very much about the experience as well as the education. And there's a big, big focus on arts, acting, music, and science. A lot of the alumni and the parents of students at Crossroads would end up being guest teachers. Dustin Hoffman was a frequent frequent guest teacher in the film department at Crossroads, and his kids also went there and struck up a friendship with Jonah Hill. And this was very, very critical for Jonah getting started in the acting world, because yes, things like getting an agent and manager obviously is going to come a lot easier to someone who not only has all of these connections and a father who is a very successful business manager in the entertainment industry, but also going to a school like this and knowing so many people and parents and things who are in the industry. And Jonah's mother was also someone who worked in the industry and was a costume designer and stylist. But the friendship with Dustin Hoffman's kids ended up getting Jonah his first acting role in the movie I Heart Huckabees. Jonah did go to the University of Colorado at Boulder for a little while, but then he went with the Hoffman siblings and they ended up going to New York and doing some writing there. And then after that, he got the role in I Heart Huckabees through Hoffman's kids. And from that point on, because he knew so many other people, a lot of the roles that started his career, it was through these connections. I mean, even his biggest role, Superbad, that was his first leading role and what really, really blew up his career, he ended up getting that role because through his connections, he had a small role in the movie Knocked Up, which was massive, massive. It came out in 2007, the same year that Superbad came out. But the reason he was cast in that movie is because Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg, who were very close friends growing up in Canada, they ended up writing the Superbad movie when they were teenagers. They started writing it when they were 13, and even the characters in the movie are called Seth and Evan and are loosely based on themselves. And when they were trying to get this movie made, it was very difficult because a lot of the studios wanted to make it a 15 and they were saying, no, it needs to be R-rated. Evan and Seth were always working and tweaking Superbad, and they started trying to get other work while they were still trying to pitch the movie. And it ended up being Seth's work on another series that ended up getting him and Evan help on the script and tightening it up and the connections to end up getting Superbad produced. Of course, Seth Rogen was cast on Freaks and Geeks. That was Judd Apatow's show, and through that, Judd Apatow wrote a lot more parts and cast Seth Rogen and Jason Segel and James Franco and a lot of the other Freaks and Geeks people in his movies. And Judd Apatow, of course, did these films like Knocked Up and This Is 40, and you see all the same people in it. And so when they were doing Knocked Up, they'd actually ended up getting Superbad greenlit by Sony. And in fact, the woman who was the producer and greenlit Superbad, Amy Pascal, she also went to Crossroads, the school. And so when they were trying to cast Superbad, they were having a lot of trouble with the role of Seth in the film. And when they were working on Knocked Up, they were having this discussion on the set. Again, it's like all the same people that are in all of these movies with Judd Apatow and stuff. And Seth and Judd Apatow are talking about, oh, it's a very hard role. I don't know who could do it. And Jonah Hill had a small part in Knocked Up, and all of a sudden Seth Rogen said, oh, Jonah can do it. And there's an interview where Seth Rogen talks about just on their break, they kind of took Jonah Hill into Seth Rogen's trailer on the Knocked Up set and filmed like a little 5-minute scene and sent it to Amy Pascal, the Sony producer, and said like, oh, this is who we should cast. Prior to Superbad, Jonah had done mainly small or supporting roles like The 40-Year-Old Virgin, Click, Accepted with Justin Long, which will be relevant in a minute. But even though Superbad was his first lead role, he immediately wanted to make it known that he was a star, and he really tried to get Chris Mentz, who ended up playing McLovin. He was very, very against them hiring him and even asked them not to hire him. And when he was hired, he wanted them to get rid of him because he didn't like him. And the woman that was casting Superbad is a woman called Alison Jones, and she is absolutely legendary for casting. She has cast some incredible, incredible projects. The Office, Barbie, The Good Place. I mean, if you look at her resume, resume. It's absolutely insane, the stuff that she's worked on. And she was the one casting a lot of the Superbad roles. And she had actually cast Christopher Mentz, who played McLovin, off of just a little video that he'd filmed on a camera phone. And this is 2007. So you know that the camera wasn't the greatest quality on a phone back then. And whenever Jonah and Christopher Mentz were doing like the read through and kind of chemistry tests, Jonah was getting very annoyed that Christopher Mentz was getting so many laughs. And Seth Rogen, Judd Apatow, Allison Jones, and Michael Cera have all talked about how immediately after this run through, Jonah Hill like really hated Christopher Mentz. Everyone else who was working on the project were saying to Jonah, no, actually we want to go with him because he's good for the part, but also you hating him is better for the kind of chemistry that we're going with in this movie. And they did obviously, of course, like end up casting him, and he did the entire movie, and it was a huge success. It's a massively successful movie, and obviously launched the careers of Jonah Hill, Michael Cera, and Emma Stone. That was the first movie that she ever did. And there's a story that Bill Hader's told about when Superbad came out. He and Emma Stone went to the movies to see it because it was the first time like Emma Stone was going to see herself in a cinema, and they sat at the back and like watched the movie and were really blown away like how much people seem to like it and all the laughs and stuff. But when they were filming through the success of the film, Jonah Hill had a lot of problems with Christopher Mentz becoming the really big kind of star of that film, and especially all of the quotes and, you know, even like the t-shirts and stuff that were made from it, they were all centered around the McLovin character. And Jonah Hill just did not treat Christopher Mentz or a lot of the crew or people that worked on that movie very well, according to a lot of the interviews and things that have come out over the years. And as I said, all of the people involved with producing and casting have spoken about how much Jonah Hill hated Christopher Mentz and how poorly he treated him. And I mean, if that's what they're saying in interviews, I can't imagine what they're not saying in interviews. And not only is it kind of wild for your first lead role to say, don't cast this guy in your movie that you've been working on since you were 13, it probably is even more insane to say fire this guy when you know the story behind the casting of Christopher Mentz for McLovin, as Allison Jones, who I mentioned just a minute ago, is the most incredible casting director, and she says that casting McLovin was the hardest role she's ever cast. I know I mentioned a few of Allison Jones's projects a minute ago, like The Office and stuff, but she has worked on so many incredible shows. She's even done stuff like way back, like Golden Girls, Family Ties, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Freaks and Geeks. She's done nearly all of Judd Apatow's projects, Arrested Development. She's done Parks and Rec, which is like one of my favorite shows. Of course, as I mentioned, The Office, which I also love. She's done movies like Lady Bird and Barbie. Honestly, even when you watch like interviews with her and stuff, she comes off so knowledgeable, and she just seems like someone who's really great at their job. And I think the proof is obviously in so many of the shows and movies that she's cast. She's found these people that are absolutely amazing talents, and she has been the one to cast them in a lot of the projects that were their first big roles, and certainly a lot of the roles that really set them up into these huge careers in Hollywood. So I say all that because I'm sure a lot of people might not be familiar with like casting directors and like by name certainly, but Allison Jones, when she was casting McLovin, they found it so difficult to find the part that she was actually going around and putting up posters that were literally saying, geeks who want to act, call this number. And so they auditioned so many people. And when they did eventually find Christopher Mentz, for then Jonah Hill is in his first lead role and is like 24, to turn around and say to Allison Jones, who, yes, it was only 2007, 2006, 2007 at this stage, but today she's had a 43-year long career, plenty of those massive shows she had done before, and she already had this incredible reputation in the industry. And regardless of that fact, it's still, in my opinion, just like so rude to come on to a set and do that. And in fact, not only has Alison Jones given Jonah Hill a lot of his other projects, Alison Jones is also responsible for giving Beanie Feldstein her big break in the movie industry, as although she had done Broadway, her first big lead movie role was in Olivia Wilde's directorial debut Booksmart. And Beanie's first name isn't obviously Beanie, it's Elizabeth, but Beanie is the nickname her childhood nanny gave her, and so that's what she's just gone by professionally too. She is the youngest of the three Feldstein siblings. Jonah is in the middle, and they also had an older brother, Jordan Feldstein, who, it's a really horrible story what happened to him. He passed away just a few years ago at only 40, and he had 2 children. He was a very successful music manager, and he was married for a very short period of time to Clint Eastwood's daughter. I've never been able to get concrete information on this, but the rumor was that the marriage was a result of a drunk Vegas situation, that apparently they ended up annulling it because the fathers on both the groom and the bride's side were not impressed by the decision to do this, and the lack of prenup and prenup planning, because obviously both families are extremely wealthy. And Jordan passed away very, very suddenly. He actually had a blood clot in his leg, and he passed away just a few days before Christmas. And obviously 40 is like just really, really awful situation. And as I said, he was a very successful music manager. He managed Maroon 5 for their entire career until his passing. And as I mentioned, the Feldsteins were very close friends of Adam Levine and his whole family. And not only did they grow up together, and Jonah Hill and Adam Levine are best friends since grade school, Jonah Hill actually officiated Adam Levine's wedding. Jonah's mum is actually Adam's godmother, and Jonah and Adam's mum, I believe still, but they did for a while certainly, run a charity together. And not only were Jonah and Adam very friendly growing up and in the earlier days of their careers, they also were a part of like a friendship group of very well-connected Nepo babies whose parents weren't actors but were very wealthy and established in Hollywood, like Maggie and Jake Gyllenhaal and Jason Segel. Jason Segel also, like Jonah and Seth Rogen and James Franco and all the others, they all started their careers through Judd Apatow. And of course, Jason and Seth and James Franco all started on Judd Apatow's TV series Freaks and Geeks together. I do talk about that a little bit more in my James Franco video from a few weeks ago. Just to give a tiny little bit more information on what I talked about at the beginning of the video with Jonah and his team kind of rewriting history, and certainly rewriting or reimagining his upbringing and the early days of his career. Of course, a lot of people in Hollywood do this, and certainly a lot of Nepo babies. A lot of Nepo babies seem to want to put out this narrative that they had this struggle and are just like everybody else, when that's obviously very far from the truth. And I also mentioned the rewriting of history because I predict that this is what's going to happen next month when Jonah comes back for his first project in over 3 years. And I think we're going to see a lot of rewriting of history when it comes to his controversy and all the allegations that came out about him 3 years ago. When Jonah was cast in his first role in 2004 in I Heart Huckabees, he didn't even have an agent at the time, which I'm sure most people will tell you that it's pretty next to impossible to get a role in a mainstream project with multiple big names without an agent. When you try and look up information about Jonah's relationship with Dustin Hoffman and when he's talked about this early part of his careers and interviews and stuff, it is very difficult to find and seems to be intentionally buried. It's only really when you look at media outside of the US is when you find a lot of these quotes from him and him discussing it, because he really won't discuss it anymore. There are a few interviews like from the UK's The Guardian from over 15 years ago where there's a few little quotes that I'll put on the screen about where he does say Dustin Hoffman discovered him, but put a pin in Jonah and his team and PR manipulation for a little bit later in the video too. I Heart Huckabee starred Dustin Hoffman, and as I mentioned earlier, Jonah Hill at this point in 2004 has been friends with both Jake and Ali Hoffman for years and years, and he also goes on to date Ali Hoffman. So I'm going to throw a lot of information and names here, but this information and how all these people are connected and their kind of nepo connections and families and friends and hookups, it's honestly wild when you look at it, but it's kind of Hollywood nepotism at its finest. And this is happening in 2004. And honestly, it's even worse today with getting auditions, interviews, and roles through family, friends, connections, and all of those sorts of things. So Dustin Hoffman gets him this part in the movie he's starring in, and that's his first role. And then he's introduced to two more people, one being Judd Apatow, that immediately leads to the small role in The 40-Year-Old Virgin. And then, of course, goes on to all of these other roles with Knocked Up and Superbad and all the other Judd Apatow movies. And it also leads to roles in things like Forgetting Sarah Marshall and Get Him to the Greek, which he met Jason Segel and people like that through Knocked Up and 40-Year-Old Virgin and all of that. Now, along with Judd Apatow, the other connection that's made was to Adam Sandler. And this connection also led to one of Jonah Hill's first roles, and that was in the movie Click. And there are so many Nepo babies in Click. Actually, all of the actors playing the different older versions of Adam Sandler's kids in Click, they're all played by Nepo babies. Adam Sandler's character, Michael Newman, in Click has two kids, Ben and Samantha. And at different points in the movie, you see the two kids at different ages. Ben is played at 17 by Jonah Hill. He's played in his mid-20s-ish by Dustin Hoffman's son, Jake Hoffman. And then the daughter is called Samantha. She's played by Lorraine Nicholson, the daughter of Jack Nicholson. And the adult Samantha is played by Katie Cassidy, David Cassidy's daughter. And one other really wild Jonah Hill, Dustin Hoffman connection that I hardly ever see talked about, and this also involves James Franco, but it's not through Judd Apatow. This is to do with Jonah Hill and Dustin Hoffman's daughter's relationship, and that's the fact that their relationship inspired a movie. When Jonah Hill was working on the movie The Watch with Ben Stiller, he was talking to Ben Stiller about how he's going on vacation with Dustin Hoffman. And obviously, Dustin Hoffman and Ben Stiller, who Ben Stiller is also a Nepo baby, they worked on Meet the Fockers and all those movies together. And Sean Levy, who's known for Stranger Things and Deadpool and loads of other stuff, he overheard this conversation between Jonah Hill and Ben Stiller. And Jonah Hill was saying, oh yeah, like I've known Dustin Hoffman for years and years, but I don't think he likes me anymore. And we're going on vacation together and all of this. And so that conversation prompted Sean Levy to create a movie down the road that ended up being Why Him, that starred Bryan Cranston and James Franco. And I talked about this movie also in my James Franco movie because the actress who played the girlfriend in Why Him has spoken many times about how much she hated working with James Franco and what an absolute creep that he was. So that is just wild connections. And Jonah Hill ended up being given a producer credit for being the inspiration in why him.
Jonah Hill dated your daughter for a while, right?
Yes, I'm not supposed to talk about that.
I did a movie called Why Him?
Yes.
Anyway, Jonah was talking to Ben Stiller on the set one time, really early in his relationship.
This is true.
He was really like nervous about it. He thought, you know, that you wouldn't like him. And the producer, Sean Levy, overheard it.
Yes.
He's like, that's a great
Idea
story.
for a movie.
One thing about this group that James Franco and Seth Rogen and Jonah and Jason Segel and Jay Baruchel, who he actually talks very openly, Jay, about how much he dislikes and doesn't get on with Jonah. But all of that group with some other people that kind of swap in and out of the group, like Channing Tatum and Aziz Ansari, a lot of them kind of tell on themselves because they have done a lot of jokes about each other that has later turned out to be true. Again, I feel like I've said my James Franco video about 3 times, but in that video, I talked about how James Franco had a roast. There was like a roast on Comedy Central of James Franco. And all of these people I've mentioned were the ones like hosting the roast and doing all of the jokes. And all through that roast, nearly every single person who comes up and like goes into James Franco, nearly all of them, because all like the main people are sitting on the stage, nearly all of them make some sort of dig about Jonah Hill and him just being like rude and horrible and stuff. And of course, there's so many examples of James Franco and all of these like jokes that Seth Rogen and people would make about James Franco going after underage girls, like trying to bring underage girls and underage fans to hotel rooms. There's even a Saturday Night Live monologue where Seth Rogen goes into, underage fans and hotels and James Franco. And so when a lot of this stuff came out about Jonah Hill being a douche and being a prick, this again seemed to be a situation at the James Franco roast where they were all telling on each other. Whenever his kind of rudeness or really like aggressiveness sometimes is brought up, he will immediately say that it's to do with people discussing his weight. And while I absolutely do have sympathy for the fact that he was really, really like his weight was talked about so much, and when he loses weight, gains weight, and as someone who's like lost a lot of weight myself, obviously like I'm a normal person, I'm not dealing with it in any way with like media and stuff, but yeah, like people do comment on it. But when you watch the vast majority of these interviews, I would say yes, like people definitely make inappropriate comments. They make comments that come off as rude, but a lot of the time it's nothing to do with his weight. It's just him being rude. Jonah also only seems to really be concerned about comments about himself. There have been many stories about him speaking horrendously, particularly about women and how they look. And especially when he'll get some sort of comment or question that he doesn't like, he will blow up and turn extremely vicious. And this might not have anything at all to do with his weight. There's a commentary, like they used to do a lot of those DVD commentaries, especially in the 2000s and like very early 2010s. You'd buy the DVD and it would be a lot of the time like the stars of the movie or the director, and a lot of them honestly they would give like a lot of really good information. And I cannot believe the Superbad one, like they put it out because he is so rude. And at one point one of the actors walks off because like obviously you're not seeing it, you're just hearing it, but he is so rude. And I haven't been able to listen to a few of the other commentaries because I just can't get access to them, because they are a lot of the time kind of lost media, because some of them are uploaded to YouTube, but unless you have the DVD, you can't really get it. And some of the DVDs you can't buy anymore. So a lot of these, I've just like read other people mentioning them or talking about them even when they came out. And so while some of them I haven't like actually listened to myself, and yes, the people that I'm reading could be making it up, but a lot of the comments are from 2008, say, when the DVD commentary came out. So I can't really imagine that that is what happened. But there's a lot of these commentaries where people have said, ooh, he came off like so badly. Or I think then when there wasn't so much publicity and so much social media and all of that, where you weren't, you had this kind of distance between you and celebrities, especially in the 2000s. And so people weren't seeing so much about the behind the scenes, and you were seeing stars in these very curated interviews. And so in the late 2000s, when people have seen all of these movies that are him in Superbad and Knocked Up and all these like, oh, funny guy movie, whenever they listen to the commentary, a lot of people were like, oh, whoa, like this is not what I expected at all. And again, I'm going to preempt this with, these are just comments that I've read, but there are also countless comments on forums and places like Reddit of people who have actually either met Jonah in person or worked on some sort of interview or something he's been on, worked on a lot of the productions that he's been involved in. And all of these stories have the exact same through line. He was awful. He was terrible to deal with. He was so difficult to work with. But there's just so many of them that it's really difficult to believe that every single one of them isn't true. Because again, when I'm researching these videos, like I really try and do a super deep dive, and there's just so many comments that it's really hard to believe that at least some of them aren't true. But put a pin in that for a few minutes, as we'll talk a lot more towards the end of the video, not only about people's on set and behind the scenes stories and rumors about Jonah Hill, but also people who've encountered him in the wild, women that have been hit on by him, and what their experiences were like. There have also been allegations that whenever Jonah has gone on a show, especially a lot of smaller shows or not mainstream shows or shows outside the US, and he's had like this very terrible interview with someone where he doesn't like what they say, or it just becomes really like tense and he starts to be rude. A lot of the time, the show or like the interviewer will issue this like really groveling apology, which the fact that they put this apology out and it will be like so long and so detailed, it just really seems like there might have been some sort of, you need to do this or we will not come back on the show, or we will not let XYZ go on the show. I mean, that's just kind of my interpretation, because it just seems like a lot is being put into these like really detailed, long apologies that really suck up to Jonah Hill, to be honest. And I just can't imagine that there's any sort of other motivation for it, because there's interviews all the time that come off badly and people say dumb things, but it just seems to be kind of a pattern too, that anytime that he's upset with an interviewer, that these really detailed like suck up apologies come out. Could it just be that the interviewers or whatever decide to do that? Sure, but again, it just seems kind of suspicious to me. So I want to get into the main big story that happened in 2023, where his ex-girlfriend Sarah Brady released text messages and had allegations that he was emotionally abusive. And after this story came out, he pretty much disappeared and he hasn't done anything since then. And this is also when just after this is when he started to say that he wasn't going to do any media going forward. He's not really going to do any sort of publicity for anything that he works on in the future, coincidentally. And I think that's why from now on, when he does come back next month and beyond that, you're really probably not going to see him, one, work on much that he didn't write and direct, because I don't think that too many directors would be thrilled about hiring a big name actor with a big paycheck and that actor wouldn't promote the show or the movie, because while these actors get millions and millions of dollars, it's not just for acting. Like, especially someone who has name recognition, that big multi-million dollar check very much includes the publicity and promotion for the project. I also think this is why you'll see him working with studios like Apple, because Apple TV, it's a loss leader. I don't think that will ever be profitable, and they could not care less about it. It's kind of like Publix and Target. They'll sell bread or milk or something at cost or even losing a few cents because it will get people in the door to purchase all their other groceries. Apple TV is kind of just another feather in Apple's cap. They have so much money that they couldn't really care less about spending a couple of million on an awesome show like Pluribus or Severance, but that's a topic for another day. And I'm not saying he's never going to do something through like Netflix or some other platform where they want their shows and their platform to be profitable. That's like their main goal. But I do think you'll see him much more on stuff like Apple and things, because again, they are probably the studio that's going to be more in line with being like, oh, okay, yeah, it doesn't matter if you don't promote it that much, show up to the red carpet, take some pictures, we're fine with that. And I did just think I should add the fact that like he probably, if he went to like a Netflix or something, he might do it in an ensemble show where if he's doing it with 5 other people or even a larger ensemble, then him not promoting the show wouldn't be as big of a deal, because everybody else would go and do all of the press tour and all of that stuff. So just to very quickly close the gap between Moneyball and the allegations, Moneyball was 2013 when he really started to get a lot of recognition outside of comedy, and he got his first Oscar nomination for that. The same year as Moneyball, 2013, is also when he started to move into writing. He did 21 Jump Street that he starred in and wrote, and that was with Channing Tatum, who I have to do a video on him soon because I have so many stories about him and some very strange connections. But 21 Jump Street went down pretty favorably. I actually was managing an AMC Movies when that came out, and I remember that it sold really well in Tampa anyway, where Channing Tatum's pretty popular because he's from Tampa. But that movie did do pretty well, especially for like a reboot. And along with Jump Street and Moneyball in 2013, he also does This Is the End with all of the Apatow guys, and that Channing Tatum's also in that with him. And that movie is also, a lot of people say, a movie that they all tell on themselves because they play kind of themselves and they don't come across the greatest either. I do talk about that more in the James Franco video because there's all the Emma Watson stuff, but again, the same year, he starts working on the massive Martin Scorsese movie that stars Leonardo DiCaprio, The Wolf of Wall Street, which was a very, very big movie. And due to like the budget and everything that was happening, Jonah Hill reportedly took the standard minimum fee for a supporting actor role on the movie, which is $64,000. And there was a lot, his team was constantly pushing this out, that he took the $64,000 for this, which obviously he's already a multi-millionaire by this stage, and you're going to get a much bigger return going in a Martin Scorsese movie starring Leonardo DiCaprio. If you do a good job, that's going to work out pretty well for you. Jonah received his second Oscar nomination for The Wolf of Wall Street, and over the next few years after The Wolf of Wall Street, he mainly did voice work and started to go into writing. He did things like the Lego movies and Sausage Party and the sequel to Jump Street, 22 Jump Street, and he was also credited as a producer and a story writer on Why Him that I mentioned earlier. That came out in 2016. Also in 2016, he stars in the movie War Dogs with Miles Teller and the poor crew that had to deal with them on that movie. You'd be pretty hard pressed to find 2 people that are starring in a movie together and they're kind of the predominant main acting roles in that movie. There's not like a massive ensemble cast, and they have both terrible, terrible reputations, and terrible reputations for how they treat crew and production staff. War Dogs is actually based on a true story. Ephraim was an arms dealer and he ended up going to prison. And when he was in prison, he met a career criminal who did like millions and millions worth of mortgage fraud called Matt Cox, who's actually a Tampa YouTuber now. And there was a big like lawsuit over the book and things. I'll link Matt Cox's channel in the sources because he talks like all about this and he talks all about his story and stuff. But he actually committed like millions worth of mortgage fraud, went on the run for several years. And the woman that he went on the run with, this woman called Becky, she actually used to work with my dad, which is like so weird. But anyway, that is just like a funny aside I wanted to mention. But after he did War Dogs and Why Him in 2016, he mainly just did like voice work and some little bits of writing for a few years. There wasn't really a big significant role until 2021 when he did the very anticipated Adam McKay movie called Don't Look Up. And this movie has an incredible cast list. The main stars are Leonardo DiCaprio and Jennifer Lawrence, but it's insane how many people are in it. And Jonah Hill plays the son of the president, and the president is played by Meryl Streep. After Don't Look Up, which was on Netflix in 2021, he then did a documentary on Netflix in 2022. The Netflix documentary was called Stutz, and it was about his therapist. There was some positive reception towards this documentary, but I have seen far more criticism for it, honestly. A lot of psychiatrists and therapists and psychologists criticized Stutz and Jonah Hill for just a lot of the way that the therapist relationship was portrayed. And Stutz also claims throughout that he created this new kind of therapy, but that therapy has been around for a very long time and practiced by many, many therapists. A lot of people also said that they thought that this documentary kind of crossed a lot of boundaries and thought that Jonah Hill came across incredibly self-centered and to be pretty manipulative. And this documentary became an even bigger talking point later that year when his ex, Sarah Brady, released the text messages between them and a bit of her story about dating him. I will link in the sources Psychology in Seattle, Dr. Kurt Honda's videos on Jonah Hill, where he talks about the documentary and also about these text messages. There's two videos that he did, like a part 1 and a part 2. And he, from a psychologist standpoint, like talks about the Stultz documentary, and I just thought it was really interesting, so I linked both of those in the sources below too. When Sarah Brady posted her text messages with her ex Jonah Hill, she did caveat it by saying that she felt as though he was being emotionally abusive, controlling, and was showing narcissism in the messages. And Psychology in Seattle and other practitioners that I watched videos on, a lot of them did point out certain things in the messages that come across as controlling, but many of them did shy away from the narcissism label. But as I said, those videos are linked down below if you want to watch like the full thing with all the context. But we are going to go over the messages now and just highlight a lot of the major things that most people kind of zoned in on and had issues with whenever these messages came out in July 2023. Miss G has been kind enough to lend us her iPad to read these messages. Originally, I got this iPad for doing things like thumbnails and working on the channel, but Miss G has decided it is now her iPad. I will put a little clip in so you can see how enthusiastic she is about her iPad.
Get him, get him, get him. Get him. Get him. Oh! He fell off the couch then.
So just to give a tiny little bit of information about Sarah's background and how they started dating, and I will give a little bit more context and information towards the end about kind of what's happened between these messages coming out in July 23 to now. But Sarah is a professional surfer and a surf instructor, and I believe at the time in 2023 she was in law school. And based on what I can see from her Instagram, it does seem like last summer in June 2025 she did graduate from law school. She and Jonah Hill ended up dating because she had posted a picture online of her surfing. You know, she'd get sponsorships with surf companies and brands and things like that, and they didn't know each other. He sent the picture that she had posted to her in direct messages and did like a heart eye emoji, and they started talking and started dating from there. And they dated from 2021 to 2022, so just under 2 years. I will post, of course, all the links to the pictures and things like that and the stories if you want to see like the full thing, because there's lots of images and comments and things like that that you get more of the full context looking at all the pictures. While there is a series of stories, most of the main criticism towards Jonah Hill came from one of the text messages Sarah shared from him that listed what he calls a list of boundaries if they want to continue dating that she needs to adhere to. And not to bust out my bachelor's in psychology, but most of the therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists that I've seen talk about this story, they will always say boundaries aren't something you give someone else. They're things that you set for yourself. This is my boundary for myself whenever I go out, and I don't drink. So whenever I go out, normally I leave about midnight because that's when lots of other people start getting drunk, and I don't want to be around a bunch of drunk people when I'm still cold sober. I don't go out to people and say, to be my friend, you can't have more than 2 drinks and you can't be out past midnight because I like to go home at midnight. Maybe that's like a dumb example, but that is the sort of context that I've got listening to all of the psychiatrists and psychologists whenever it comes to the boundaries and the way that Jonah Hill lays it out. So the text message in like the full context says, plain and simple, if you need surfing with men, boundaryless, inappropriate friendships with men, to model, to post pictures of yourself in a bathing suit, to post sexual pictures, to have friendships with women who are in unstable places, and from your wild recent past, beyond getting a lunch or a coffee or something respectful, I am not the right partner for you. If these things bring you to a place of happiness, I support it, and there will be no hard feelings. These are my boundaries for romantic partnership. My boundaries with you, based on the way these actions have or hurt our trust. There's a lot of misspelling and like bad grammar and sentence structure and things. So you will hear some mistakes like that, but I want to read it out as it's written. So obviously, immediately a lot of people were saying, well, you can't really give someone a list of demands. And also a lot of the things like posting pictures of her surfing or in bathing suits, she's a professional surfer. And also that's how they met, was he responded to a picture of her in a bathing suit surfing. And obviously someone should be able to post whatever picture they want of their body and everything like that. But even if you looked at a lot of the pictures that Sarah was posting when these messages came out and before that, and when they were dating, she was in like a one piece a lot of the time. And a lot of the pictures were just clearly her showing her surfing. There are several other text messages that focus on the Instagram and what's being posted there. And certainly a lot of the psychologists and therapists videos that I watched, one of the other text messages that they really, really had issue with were the ones that were talking about Sarah removing certain videos and pictures on Jonah's request. There's one of the text messages where Sarah's replied, and you can't see like the top of it, but from the context, it seems like she's taken down pictures. And she said, 3 removed, not the video yet. It's my best surfing video. Would you feel better if the cover frame was different? Any more specific ones that bother you? And then he says, yes, one that isn't of your ass in a thong. And then she replies saying, not a thong, but K. And then he says, and as far as the other pictures, you in a bathing suit, surfing or not? Then immediately he replies saying, I'm done. There's tons. I'm just going back the past month. And I also think it's worth noting that he is obviously a big A-list star, and there is an age gap in the relationship. They both are completely consenting adults. He is in his like late 30s when these messages are being sent, and she's 24. And I've spoken before about the fact that I'm again clinging to my late 30s, but I have 2 sisters who are 3 and 4 years younger than me. But then I have a brother who is more like a brother's son because he is very, very young when my mom passed, and he's 24 now. And thinking about him or any of his friends, and they were getting messages like this, I would be absolutely furious if I read messages that a woman had sent him saying, you need to not post pictures like this. He doesn't really post on social media, but you know what I mean for the example's sake. I think there are a lot of people who also could identify either from dating someone like this themselves or having a friend who had dated someone like this. Another big part of the messages was Sarah discussing with her friend either the couples therapy that she and Jonah went to together, or her therapist and that therapist kind of interpretation of the relationship, because Jonah obviously has his therapist, Dr. Stutz, and then they have a couples therapist, and then she has her own therapist. And there's messages that she shared with her friend where she's kind of discussing what the couple therapist had said about if a man approaches you when you're surfing, that you just need to paddle away and say, I'm going to talk to my boyfriend. And then there's a part where Jonah and her are having a conversation about her therapist, and Jonah's messages say, I love how your therapist thinks I suck. New message, I literally am the best boyfriend. New message on earth. And not saying this is fact, but usually if somebody is crowing about what an amazing boyfriend they are, or what an amazing this or that they are, that's usually a red flag in my book. But that's just my own personal opinion. But I would be very interested to know what people think. I do want to note that Jonah Hill has never discussed these. He's not said anything about them. The one other thing that we're going to touch on next, he has actually come out, well, his reps have come out and issued a denial. Hi guys, Editing Ash here. I just forgot to mention one thing. It's not really a response. It's more like a prick move, to be honest. Jonah Hill has this wellness lifestyle brand. It's like a streetwear company called Meaningful Existence, and it's supposed to be poking fun at wellness brands who charge like really expensive prices for putting 2 words on a tote bag and then charging something obscene for it. But the thing with Jonah Hill, like if they were doing that, like I get the point, but they're charging outrageous prices. So I don't think they know what a joke is, or maybe they just too are like, oh yeah, it's a joke, but still like give us your money. But the whole point of telling you that is that he actually released some items through this wellness brand that's called Meaningful Existence, and it was seen as a somewhat response and a dig at his ex-girlfriends and also people that were talking about this and all the backlash that he was getting. And he released tote bags and hats and other items that had complete unrelenting control on it, which not the greatest look when you have had ex-girlfriends come out and claim you are controlling, emotionally abusive, and a misogynist, but apparently he just really needed to get a dig in. I would be very, very interested to hear what people think about this in the comments section, but just wanted to add that in because I did think that it was, again, something that just seemed to indicate his character. But let me know what you think. And back to Past Me. This story, when it happened in July 2023, he really hasn't done anything since. This new project that is coming out next month in April, Outcome, is with Keanu Reeves and Cameron Diaz. And because this is the end, well, towards the end of the video, I will tell you the first time I ever saw, I probably shouldn't do this, but the first time that I ever saw a white substance was being in the vicinity of Keanu Reeves. But that is maybe a story for another day from when I was a teenager. And it wasn't even anything to do with like movies or anything like that. He knew my old boss, and I don't even know whether I could call him a boss because it was like a free internship thing. But again, that's a story for another day. So the whole thing he's doing with Keanu Reeves is with Cameron Diaz too. So I think there'll be, and Matt Bomer as well is in it, there'll be attention on Cameron Diaz coming back, and obviously Keanu Reeves is a really nice guy and super popular too. And the next project that he's doing, there's kind of two coming out within, the next project comes out in the summer of this year, and it's with Kristen Wiig, and it's called Cut Off. It's about two siblings from like a wealthy family that are cut off, and that again is coming out in the summer. So there's kind of two coming out pretty close together when he's not done anything for a very long time. As I said, he's not going to be doing media because he says that he's not doing that anymore. And the other story that happened right after Sarah Brady released her messages, and a lot of people too did criticize Sarah for sharing these messages that are obviously between her and someone she was in a relationship with, and I don't think anybody would like that. But I will also say that on the other side of that, especially because he's a celebrity, I mean, that's real, that's really the only reason that people saw the story and it turned up into a big thing. But if she didn't release the messages and she just said something like, oh, when I was in a relationship with Jonah Hill, I felt controlled, or I felt like he was controlling, or he gave me a list of these rules for dating him, then one, a lot of people would just probably say, oh, you're a liar and stuff like that. So it is a bit of a catch-22, but again, like nobody wants their messages between their significant other and their shared, or I don't think anybody wants any private messages shared for that matter. And just two other things to mention very, very briefly, because I like to give you as much information as I can, is there was also accusations that came out after Sarah released these messages from a former child actress called Alexa Nicholas, who was on Zoe 101 with Britney Spears' sister Jamie Lynn Spears. And she also ended up in the Quiet on Set documentary because she was on a Nickelodeon show, and that was like the behind the scenes of Nickelodeon, and Drake Bell told his story about what happened to him that came out 2 years ago now. I think it was this time 2 years ago. I do have a video on that, which I'll link in the sources too. But Alexa Nicholas said that Jonah Hill, she was at a party with him at Justin Long's house when Jonah was 24-ish and she was 16, and her friend who was 16 was dating Justin Long's roommate, and the roommate was allegedly Jonathan Togo, who would have been around the same age as Justin Long and Jonah Hill, like mid-20s, and the friend of Alexa was allegedly around her age, 16. And Jonathan Togo is probably best well known for CSI Miami, and I believe in 2009 he did have arrests for felony domestic abuse. And Jonah Hill ended up telling her that she had asked him for cigarettes and said, oh, I have some in my car. They went out to the car, according to Alexa, and Jonah, who was 24, allegedly pushed Alexa, who was 16, against the wall and kissed her without her consent, and of course the underage and age difference. Jonah's lawyer and management did come out and deny this. They didn't comment on like the thing with Sarah. I didn't like leave that out or anything. They did just come out and deny this. So that's their side of things. There is a lot more context and lore to Alexa Nicholas, but I would be here for longer than this video to go into all of that. And I did see if there was someone who had kind of covered everything, because I know there's been stuff recently, but I need to really like look into it way more. But already the stuff I know, it would take me so long to go over it all. And obviously this video is about Jonah Hill. It's just something that I we don't have we don't have 10 hours to go into all of that. But I did also want to mention the Punked episode that Jonah Hill was in with Justin Long. And I'm sure most people know Punked, where Ashton Kutcher pranked celebrities. Ashton Kutcher, my enemy. And if I can have one brief intermission just to tell you something really funny that happened yesterday. And I was like, I wish there was a way that I could text my subscribers, because no one else will understand how funny this is except for my amazing editor, Evelyn Darr. But that new Ryan Murphy show that Ashton Kutcher is in, The Beauty, absolutely horrendous show. The writing in the last 4 episodes, especially, oh, so bad. And the finale is the worst finale that I've seen in several years. Ashton Kutcher is playing basically his fantasy. He's playing like this vile tech billionaire. Oh, he's terrible in it.
I am superior, so kneel.
It is his worst performance. It has to be the worst performance of the year. I know we're only in March, but it truly is terrible, and there is a lot of terrible performances in this.
Beautiful people don't think the rules apply to them.
And in this horrendous show, Ashton Kutcher's wife is played by Isabella Rossellini, and the whole context of the show is they take this shot and it turns them beautiful and young and healthy, and his wife, Ashton Kutcher's wife, takes the shot and turns into Nicola Peltz Beckham. And oh my gosh, she's also terrible in it.
These things must have always been more your department.
18th century French antique.
And when I saw it, I just was like, oh my God, this is like, no one else will understand how funny this is. This is just everyone that we cover on the channel. But sorry, I just had to mention that. I suppose my Instagram stories is probably the closest to me texting people, because I post stuff on there all the time that just I think would only be funny to people who watch the channel and stuff. So follow me on Instagram if you want to see lots of stuff of G and like my other random things that I think about the channel sometimes. But back to Punk. I'm sorry for people who aren't regular listeners that you had to have that ADHD side tangent. But the Punked episode, Jonah Hill is like the one that's like in on it with Ashton Kutcher. And the whole prank is Jonah has brought Justin and his brother to meet these 2 girls. And Jonah knows the 2 girls, Justin Long and his brother don't. The girls are 17 and 18, and the 18-year-old is actually played by an unknown then, Ashley Greene, Alice from Twilight. They order drinks, they're confronted by the manager as the waitress has just taken their word for them being 21.
You guys are all of age, right?
Of age, yes.
Yeah.
Consensual.
I did see in the Daily Mail when they talked about this episode years and years ago that they put a line saying that Justin Long didn't have any reason to think that the girls were under 21. But to me, it does seem like he knew that at least they weren't 21, because immediately when they're questioned about even just asked for the ID, he starts to look panicked, and then behind his hand, he starts mouthing to the girls, pretend you're 21.
Guys, can I actually see some IDs real quickly? I noticed you guys are having drinks, so...
Justin Long then says, well, hypothetically, what if they weren't 21? And then when the manager presses the girls to reveal their age and they say 17 and 18, Justin Long straight away says, oh, well, that's close. There's no reaction from this 27-year-old that their 27-year-old friend has brought them to meet 17 and 18-year-olds.
How old are you?
I'm 18.
Okay, so that's close.
Okay.
I'm 17.
Of course, Jonah Hill is the one in on this prank, but there being no reaction from Justin Long, it makes it look like this isn't an unusual situation for them. It's only the manager questioning them that they are concerned about. And at one point later, the girl's dad even comes in, and the dad is saying, oh, you're letting them underage drink. But at no point does he say, I didn't know that they were 17. He just says, oh, I only met her tonight. One final thing I want to add is there is a mass amount of comments online about Jonah Hill and his behavior, especially with women, and Justin Long is actually included in a lot of them. Regular viewers will know I don't usually like to include lots of anonymous online comments, but I will mention them when there are overwhelming amounts. I'll link one thread in particular where someone has combined about 20 various stories over the years about Jonah Hill. Of course, they can be completely fabricated, exaggerated, missing context, but there are just so many that I've seen in the past 8-9 days researching this video, and they very much match up with a lot of the stories I've heard over the years about Jonah Hill. Hill has worked with some individuals who also have very bad reputations behind the scenes, like Brad Pitt, and it seems like when you ask anyone who's worked on his sets that it is always Hill that is the absolute worst to work with for how badly he treats crew and anyone who isn't a celebrity director or higher up. And of course, just like when Ellen got backlash from her crew and regular everyday people, Jonah Hill did have celebrities defending him. But of course, it just always looks ridiculous when a celebrity defends another celebrity for their treatment of crew and everyday people, because celebrities aren't going to treat other celebrities the same way that they do treat, say, a PA on set. Regardless, I did think it just was worth mentioning that there are a massive amount of comments online that are from people who purport they either worked with Jonah Hill in some capacity, were hit on by him, or just encountered him in places like their jobs, because there were so many of these comments very much in line with the reputation he has in the industry of being a nightmare to deal with and extremely, extremely rude. I did this video after the former Prince Andrew video, or the second former Prince Andrew video that we've done, because some of my regular viewers might have noticed that when I do like a really heavy like former Prince Andrew Epstein video, that, I mean, this definitely isn't like a lighter video, but maybe a less heavy video. And one final little tiny story, just because it happened to come up. I actually have a viewer who originally reached out after I did a video on a show that she worked on, and she reached out to say, oh yeah, a lot of that stuff you said is true, and oh, here's some other details. And we've become friends ever since that. And she and I were just texting the other day, and normally when we're texting I'll say, oh, I'm working on this video, and I said about Jonah Hill, and she said, oh, I had a friend who worked on Moneyball. And these are people that have worked in the industry for decades and have been around all types of celebrities, and she just said that Jonah Hill was just awful, complete douche. And she said that he was so bad that he made Brad Pitt more of a douche, and that's another person that I absolutely want to cover, because he has to have some of the best PR in Hollywood. That all the stuff that happened with him and Angelina Jolie and like the incident on the plane, I have talked about that a little bit on my Patreon, but I definitely want to do a video on the channel. But my point being, while Jonah Hill has allegedly a terrible reputation behind the scenes, treats people horribly, and these text messages, but we're not talking about the Epstein list or James Franco. From the 1990s through the late 2010s, James Franco was an A-list Hollywood star and a celebrity that was loved by the general public. But behind the scenes, Franco had a much darker reputation. Through the 2000s and 2010s, it was truly unbelievable how many projects Franco was a part of. But unfortunately, it wasn't just acting happening on the sets of Franco's productions. From his earliest work in Hollywood on the set of the cult hit Freaks and Geeks, accusations swirled about James Franco, with Franco even at one point exploding on the Freaks and Geeks set and physically lashing out at his co-star Busy Phillips. As James Franco's celebrity star rose over the years, his behaviour and the stories from the sets became even darker, and for years, when women would come forward about Franco's behaviour and levy accusations against him, there'd be an enormous coordination to keep the allegations hidden and out of the media. But in 2018, at the absolute height of his career, everything changed, and Franco's horrendous behavior was finally exposed, brought down by his own enormous ego. So that's what we'll be discussing today: James Franco and the avalanche of allegations many women and teenage girls have made against him. We'll also be covering how the accusations affected Franco's friendship with his longtime collaborator Seth Rogen, as Franco's expulsion from Hollywood has resulted in Seth Rogen allegedly cutting Franco off personally and professionally, with some people praising Rogen for making and following through with a difficult decision, while others are criticizing Rogen for abandoning Franco and questioning just how much Rogen knew about his former friend. James Franco's career is very different from a typical Hollywood rise and fall. His career in general is very different to most other actors, and you'd be very hard-pressed to find a lot of other actors who've kind of mirrored this same career trajectory as Franco, even just looking at his actual acting, especially a lot of the projects he chose after he was firmly on the A-list. In September 1999, NBC premiered a show called Freaks and Geeks. Freaks and Geeks only ran for one season, and it wasn't even technically the entire season, as the show was cancelled and only ended up airing 15 out of the 18 episodes that they'd shot for the first season. While the show had very little success that first year, it has gone on to have a cult following, helped in large part by the number of its young cast that have gone on to very successful Hollywood careers. Linda Cardellini, Jason Segel, Busy Phillips, Seth Rogen, and James Franco. The show also was created by Paul Feig and executive produced by Judd Apatow. Both of them have also gone on to very successful careers, and Judd Apatow has worked with many of the Freaks and Geeks cast over the past 2 decades, especially Jason Segel, Seth Rogen, and James Franco. Judd Apatow's wife, Leslie Mann, that he married 2 years prior to starting Freaks and Geeks in 1997, also guest starred on the show, and there were additional massive numbers of Freaks and Geeks guest stars who also went on to have really big acting careers, like Lizzie Kaplan, Rashida Jones, Ben Stiller, Shia LaBeouf, Ben Foster, Shaun Wise, and many more. While many of the Freaks and Geeks cast did collaborate on multiple projects in later years, no one shared more success together than James Franco and Seth Rogen, especially in the decade that followed Freaks and Geeks. Seth Rogen would also go on to establish himself as part of another duo with the writer Evan Goldberg, and they actually wrote the massive movie that launched both of their writing careers into the mainstream. That was the film Superbad, and that movie also set up a lot of the cast as well that had previously been completely unknown or had smaller roles, people like Jonah Hill, Emma Stone, Michael Cera, and James's brother Dave Franco. Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg have collaborated much more and for a longer period of time than Franco and Rogen, but because Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg had always just wrote together, and Evan Goldberg isn't someone who's in front of the camera, when the general public think of Seth Rogen and somebody he's paired up with, they think of James Franco, even though they haven't done projects together in a number of years, but because they did so many successful projects together that started all the way back in 1999 with Freaks and Geeks, Rogen and Franco became much more mainstream because, as I said, Freaks and Geeks wasn't really that popular at the time, but they had a massive, massive movie in 2008 called Pineapple Express, and this was the year after Superbad, and James Franco had done all of the Spider-Man movies by this stage, so Pineapple Express really launched them as a duo and helped both of their careers massively, and from this point on, if they weren't on the A-list, they were after this year. In the almost decade between Freaks and Geeks and Pineapple Express, Franco and Rogen did remain close, and although prior to Pineapple Express they'd never done one of each other's movies, they did do promotional things together and occasionally popped up in projects that one of their friends did, like Judd Apatow. In June 2007, a year before Pineapple Express and just 2 months before Superbad would come out, Judd Apatow wrote, produced, and directed the movie Knocked Up that starred Seth Rogen and Katherine Heigl, who was at the height of her Grey's Anatomy fame. I was 19-ish when this movie came out, and it was so huge. It's actually still the movie I think of when I think of Seth Rogen. James Franco actually had a small role in this movie too, and he plays an exaggerated version of himself. James Franco played many exaggerated versions of himself in TV shows and movies throughout his entire career, and looking back on many of these little guest spots and cameos, some of the dialogue and these caricatures of himself are very telling given the many allegations that have surfaced about him. So just put a pin in that for a few minutes. But even though they weren't really working together over this decade, it didn't mean that they both weren't busy during this time period, especially Franco. But it was pretty touch and go after Freaks and Geeks whether James Franco would go on to have much of a career, because during Freaks and Geeks, his behavior on set got him in a lot of trouble and people really did not enjoy working with him. He was pretty universally disliked on the set of Freaks and Geeks, and that wasn't just by the crew, which is sometimes the case. This was also by a lot of the cast outside of his friendship with Jason Segel and Seth Rogen. Over the years, crew members have said that even back then, James Franco was extremely competitive with the other cast members on the show, and he was someone who always positioned himself as the serious one. On the set of Freaks and Geeks, James Franco also insisted on being method, and he has continued to be a method actor throughout his career, and this is something that a lot of people do not appreciate. Even very accomplished actors have spoken about how many method actors use this to behave extremely poorly and treat others on set very rudely. And there were criticisms of James Franco even back then about just behaving however he wanted in obscene ways because he was claiming he was method. Over the last 2 decades that Franco has employed method acting, he has caused a number of incidents with other actors, and one of the stories that happened on the Freaks and Geeks set was with his co-star Busy Phillips. Franco discussed with Paul Feig and Judd Apatow how he developed a backstory for his character based on the fact he was from an abusive home, and this caused Franco to lash out frequently on his co-stars, especially his co-star Busy Phillips, who not only detailed some of the incidents in her memoir, but she's spoken many times in the media not only about these incidents, but about her blatant dislike for Franco. Busy wrote in her book, and has also said this publicly, that James Franco was a fucking bully, and Busy Phillips had quite a lot of scenes with him because she played the character called Kim, who was in an on-again, off-again relationship with James Franco's character Daniel. And one of the worst incidents that happened between them, she also details in her book, and she has also talked about this in several interviews. And this was when Franco physically and verbally lashed out at her on the set when they were having a scene together, and she was directed to basically just hit him in the chest. And this was something in the show that was supposed to happen. And when she did that, Franco went absolutely nuts and became furious, and Busy Phillips said that he grabbed her by both arms and screamed in her face, "Don't ever touch me again." She said he then threw her to the ground and she fell like flat on her back, knocking the wind out of her.
Well, at the time, but we've since made amends, James Franco and I really didn't get along. We were on Freaks and Geeks, we were 19, and we really disliked each other. It's well documented.
After the show's cancellation, Franco's career did almost stall because of his behavior behind the scenes, but we know that doesn't hold a lot of people back, to be honest. But a year after Freaks and Geeks ended, he ended up landing the lead role in James Dean. This was a role that became foundational to his public identity and how he started to push this I'm method performance. Franco studied James Dean's mannerisms obsessively. He adopted his posture and his New York accent off camera, refusing to break character at any time, even when he wasn't shooting, and he even used the accent and everything in interviews. Franco ended up winning a Golden Globe in 2001 for his performance as James Dean, but probably the most important thing about this role was how it gave him his brand that he still pushes to this very day, that he is not a common actor like the vast majority of Hollywood. He is an artist, and it is this artist brand and label that not only allowed him to get away with rude behavior, pushing boundaries, treating cast and crew with disrespect, but it laid the groundwork for James Franco thinking he could get away with anything and do whatever he wanted because he was an artist, because he was James Franco, and because he was allowed to for so long. After his award-winning performance as James Dean, he went into the complete opposite direction and was cast in a massive, big blockbuster movie, Spider-Man. Franco was cast as Harry Osborn, Peter Parker, Spider-Man's best friend, and Tobey Maguire ended up playing Peter Parker, Spider-Man, and I do have a video about Tobey Maguire and his whole poker ring, and also playing the love interest of both characters at one point in Spider-Man was Kristen Dunst playing Mary Jane Watson. This was in 2002, long before Marvel was a big, massive, successful film studio. Actually, at this point, Marvel Comics was in a pretty dire strait, and it was so small, they shared a tiny office with a balloon company. They were so desperate, in fact, that they sold the rights to Spider-Man, one of, if not their most popular, successful character, and they sold the rights to Sony, who still hold them today, and they sold all of Spider-Man for $8 million. I mean, that is crazy to think about. Obviously, $8 million is an obscenely insane amount of money, but for Spider-Man, I mean, imagine them selling someone like Iron Man now for something like 8 million, maybe 10 million with inflation. And that's actually why a lot of these B characters like Iron Man and even C characters like Guardians of the Galaxy were called up to the A team for Marvel movies, because Marvel was in such a bad situation at this time that they did sell all of their successful, really popular characters like Spider-Man, like the Fantastic Four, and the X-Men. And this was why the Spider-Man movie not was a gamble, but they definitely didn't think it was going to be as successful as it ended up being. Of course, it was still a comic book movie. It was still a big summer blockbuster, so it was very different to what Franco had done before. And Franco is in all three of the Spider-Man trilogy movies, and he, of course, turns into his enemy from his best friend throughout these three films. But the films were a massive, massive success. I mean, that's kind of an understatement. And with the insane money Franco earned from the trilogy, and is still earning today from the trilogy, he could do whatever he wanted for the rest of his life and be absolutely fine. Never mind all the other projects that he's done since that we will go into, because things certainly escalated behind the scenes as his projects continued, and he did continue to make surprising choices throughout the rest of his career. So with all of the money and all of the success from the Spider-Man movies, Franco started doing a lot of projects that maybe weren't what people expected. As I said, he teamed up with Seth Rogen to do Pineapple Express in 2008, and this was very unlike James Dean, very unlike Spider-Man, and gave him kind of this third niche that was films with Rogen, because over the next several years, the two would go on to bring in over 250 million at the box office when they did films together. The other two projects that are arguably the most significant that Rogen and Franco did together was This Is the End and The Interview, and for very different reasons. And some people might not think This Is the End is that significant, but I do think it is, more so the behind the scenes stuff. And I think that that movie is when there started to be a lot more discussion, not in the mainstream media, but outside of it, about Franco's behavior, especially with people like Emma Watson, who of course played Hermione in Harry Potter. And it's always been alleged that Franco and others' behavior on that set, which she and Franco have kind of talked around a little bit, was what prompted Emma Watson to take a big step back from Hollywood. And we will go into that in just a second. And The Interview is the other movie. For very different reasons was it significant, but it blew up into a huge thing because it almost started a war. Maybe that's hyperbolic, but it was to do with the North Korean dictator, Kim Jong-un, and they, let's just say, were not happy with how Rogen and Franco had a film about trying to assassinate him. And so North Korea were very angry about this movie coming out. And of course, like anybody would, they kind of capitalized on this. And that was a big push around the marketing for this film. And that angered them even more. And so that is actually the reason that Sony ended up being hacked, because they were the ones behind the film. And there was a lot of shit that came out from the Sony hack because it just exposed a lot of emails. There are multiple videos that I've mentioned the Sony hack before because there were a lot of people burned throughout it because just so many people talking about one another came out through these emails. Maybe that would actually be a good idea for a video, like all of the ramifications of the Sony hack. But that movie and This Is the End, Pineapple Express, and the other things that they've done over the years, people had this idea of them being not only collaborators, but best friends. And that was something that they very much leaned into. And who knows how true it was, because there are so many Hollywood friendships and things like that that are 80%. There's even some that are absolutely all bullshit and just PR, because it's like a lot of the relationships for CWWB shows or movies where co-stars are dating each other. It is really good for marketing. It is really good for PR. But Franco and Rogen, it seems like they were legitimate friends because it was for so long, but of course we don't know to what extent. Outside of his roles with Seth Rogen and the Spider-Man trilogies, Franco did very much lean into kind of two avenues with his projects. One was this more artistic awards bait avenue, and the other was more obscure projects and roles, a lot of which would prompt people to go, was that James Franco? And he'd do not only guest appearances on TV or random little cameos in films, he also did several uncredited appearances as well. One of the more artistic awards bait movies that he did was the film Milk with Sean Penn. He played the love interest of Sean Penn, who played Harvey Milk, and Sean Penn ended up winning an Oscar for that performance. Franco himself did get a lot of awards buzz, especially in the 2010s and that kind of period onwards. He ended up getting an Oscar nomination for the film 127 Hours, that's based on a true story about a hiker who becomes trapped, and his arm is kind of trapped between two boulders, and he ends up having to detach his arm from his body himself with a tiny, tiny, dull little Swiss Army knife. And it's, again, based on a true story. And for the vast, vast majority of this film, it's just Franco on the screen. And this movie, when it came out, was a very, very heavy Oscar contender. And Franco was one of the favorites for the Oscars that year. He did end up losing, but he did continue to make a lot of movies that got awards buzz. And it actually was one of these movies that he made and the buzz around it and an actual award that he won that really was what prompted his downfall. But before we talk about the downfall, there's another little sector of his life that we need to discuss, and that was his continuing performance as a college student. James Franco, for years and years and years, went to various colleges like NYU and UCLA, and he would go as a student in the beginning, then he was a faculty member, and he would constantly speak about this in the media, talking about how he'd go to class like any other student, and the media really, really ate this up. They seemed in awe that he was just hanging out with the commoners at college. James Franco and the mainstream media loved to put out this story for years, that Franco was this thoughtful artist who was this lovable, sweet guy who was very talented and so humble and down to earth, and he loved his craft so much he wanted to be a forever student. And that story was pushed for years. But in reality, it was very, very far from that. In 2012, Franco did a movie called Spring Breakers that at the time people thought was kind of an odd choice. This movie was with a lot of very, very young and successful Hollywood actresses like Selena Gomez. And this movie is really when I started to hear about him being an absolute creep. There definitely were stories long before this movie, but this is when, outside of the mainstream media, the kind of whispers about his behavior became a lot louder. And I remember having the thought when I heard about the set of this Spring Breakers, oh God, like not another one, because the year before he had done the movie Rise of the Planet of the Apes, and I really loved the Planet of the Apes movies. And I even remember actually when he was cast in Planet of the Apes, there was a lot of people that were like, oh, is he the right choice for this? And there was a lot of, I don't want to say like hate towards it, but there was a lot of people that were discussing, should we really be doing Planet of the Apes again? Because of course those are based on like the famous 60s movies. And then in 2001, I think it was, there was the Mark Wahlberg and Helena Bonham Carter and loads of other people were in it. And let's just say that version did not go down well. And so people were really apprehensive about whether this would be a good project. And there was people like James Franco and John Lithgow attached to it. So a lot of people gave it a chance, and I think it is a really good movie. And I think honestly that trilogy of Planet of the Apes is so underrated. And so when Planet of the Apes was very successful and all of the other projects that he was doing, James Franco at this early 2010s really was an absolute Hollywood golden boy. Starting with Spring Breakers in 2012 and through the next 2 years to 2014 is when Franco started doing a lot of very surprising roles, and even more surprising for someone who had won a Golden Globe, was Oscar nominated, and who'd also been in a massive blockbuster franchise. One of the most bizarre roles was him doing a 54-episode stint on the soap opera General Hospital, playing a character called Franco, who also played a creep. He did a few highly publicized episodes of shows like The Mindy Project, and would also do uncredited appearances and small cameos on shows and movies like Veronica Mars, Alien Covenant, and often in these small guest appearances and one-offs and cameos, he would appear as himself like he did on the show 30 Rock.
This is the non-disclosure agreement regarding anything you two may learn about each other during the course of the relationship.
Yeah, what exactly is Mr. Franco covering up here?
Oftentimes, roles like these, when looking back, some people might say these roles when he was playing like exaggerated versions of himself seem to be hinting at some of the things that were going on behind the scenes. During this time, Franco appeared in so many projects, and during this time, the vast majority of the interviews and promos and all of the media that focused around the projects, they all seemed to love Franco and would go on about his studies and his teachings and what a creative he was. But the stories outside the mainstream media, again, were very different. People who attended school with Franco reported that on the rare occasion he would come to class, he would usually just use the opportunity to pick up his younger classmates who were all 18, 19, 20, 21. And the other rare times that he was in class, he was usually asleep. There have also been several people who attended school with Franco that have spoken out over the past few years, and there were also rumors that when Franco was actively in all of these various classes, that he had paid other students and even teachers' assistants to do the courses for him. There also were extensive concessions made for Franco that started right at the beginning when he re-enrolled at UCLA in 2006 as an English major. Prior to Freaks and Geeks in 1999, Franco had attended UCLA for 1 year, but he did drop out to pursue acting. When Franco dropped out of UCLA, his wealthy family family cut him off. And Franco's father had become very frustrated by this decision, as he thought that James had finally got things together because he went very off track while he was in high school. Franco had gotten a lot of trouble while he was in high school and had even been arrested multiple times, which at one point led to him being a ward of the court. He was arrested for some very minor things like graffiti, but would eventually progress up to things like extensive theft. And at one point, he was stealing cologne all the time and then selling it to his classmates at school. When he dropped out of UCLA, his parents refused to support him any longer, and he started working at the McDonald's drive-thru at night. And he has talked about this extensively over the years and said he used to do things like try different accents when he was on the drive-thru. Over the years, in many interviews, Franco has tried to lean into this humble beginnings working at McDonald's, but he is from a very wealthy Silicon Valley family. You kind of see his younger brother, Dave Franco, trying to follow the same line. With Dave Franco, he's from a wealthy family, but he also denies that him being James Franco's brother gave him any sort of leg up in the industry at all. As I mentioned earlier, Dave Franco's first movie was Superbad with his brother's friend, and his brother even had a cameo in that movie. His next movie was Milk, which was his brother's movie. And outside of the Now You See Me movie trilogies and a few really terrible TV shows, like his one season of Scrubs that was universally hated because it was that kind of spin-off reboot season of Scrubs, and also the ABC family show Greek, the vast majority of Dave Franco's projects, especially the first 10 years of his career, were in some way connected to his brother or one of his brother's friends and collaborators. And even though Seth Rogen and James Franco don't work together anymore, Seth Rogen does still cast Dave Franco in a lot of his projects. And it wasn't just that Franco was allegedly not going to class or sleeping in the few classes he went to or having allegedly other students do his work, but there was also massive concessions made by the universities for Franco. For example, he was allowed to take 62 course credits per quarter compared to the usual max of 19. And that's usually like the hours per week that you would go. So if you're doing, say, 12 course credits, you have class 12 hours because it's normally 3 times the amount that you're in class that you're supposed to be like studying and doing work. And most people, I mean, it really does range, but most people try and do between like 16 and 18, and that will usually spit you out at the end doing a 4-year degree and finishing somewhat on time. And people will take, maybe 4 credits over the summer and things like that. But 62 is obscene for anyone, never mind someone who is having a completely massive Hollywood career, as this was the same time that he was filming the tail end of the Spider-Man trilogy. It was during Spider-Man 3 that he was also given a ton of credits towards his degree. So he ended up finishing his degree in 2 years, basically. And in June 2008, he graduated with a bachelor's degree in English. Of course, celebrities have more time than us normal people. They've kind of removed the mundanity of life and have people doing everything for them. But it seems the only way James Franco received these various bachelor's and later master's degrees was being given the vast majority of the credits. As I said earlier, Franco loved nothing more than to remind people that he was this forever student, and the media enjoyed him talking about this too. And it really seemed over the years that these colleges and universities were lining up to bestow degrees on Franco. It was clear by the late 2000s and the early 2010s that there were plenty of stories circulating about his behavior both on and off campus with young girls and young women in their late teens and early 20s. And there were also many people associated with these colleges and universities, both students and professors, who spoke out about Franco and attempted to go to the colleges and universities about him and his behavior. But exactly like what was happening with his behavior in Hollywood, the people who could actually do something, the people with the power, looked the other way and downright ignored what was going on with Franco. Before we discuss what actually was happening behind the scenes and on a lot of the sets, I briefly want to cover what Franco was able to do at these schools through the late 2000s and early 2010s, as I don't think there's really been that much coverage, and the legitimacy that these schools provided him with allowed him to prey on countless more victims and even create a system that enabled his horrendous behavior. The year after he graduated from UCLA, Franco was announced as the commencement speaker for UCLA's graduation ceremony that was supposed to happen on June 12, 2009. Months before the event, his selection drew a lot of criticism from students. They even ran an editorial in the campus newspaper questioning not only his qualifications, but him as a person and his behavior, and they even organized a Facebook page. This is 2009, so, Facebook had a lot more sway back then, and it was opposing him giving the commencement. On June 3rd, just over a week before the ceremony, Franco withdrew from the engagement, citing a scheduling conflict. Classic Hollywood. And he said that he was going into pre-production on something. In January 2011, Franco later addressed the controversy in a self-referential kind of way when he was collaborating with the Harvard Lampoon, and he made a satirical video through Funny or Die that really kind of mocked his last-minute cancellation. Whether Franco knew his number was up at UCLA or whether he just fancied a change, he ended up relocating to New York City after this whole controversy, and he started attending multiple schools there. Quickly, more students from these new schools started speaking out about similar things that had gone on at UCLA. Franco not coming to class, and on the odd occasion he did, making a lot of the female students uncomfortable. This is also when there started to be a lot of stories, again, outside the mainstream media, where other students were saying that Franco was turning up at a lot of their parties, unbeknownst to most of them, and even sometimes people were like, why is James Franco here? Franco enrolled in three prestigious master's programs at the same time. The first was Columbia University School of the Arts for writing, NYU, New York University's filmmaking masters at the Tisch School of the Arts, and then he also participated at Warren Wilson College in North Carolina, focusing on poetry. Franco completed his MFA at Columbia University in 2010, and that same year, he also enrolled at Yale University's PhD program in English. In addition to all of these programs, he attended courses at Rhode Island School of Design, and in September 2010, there was an interview with him in Showbiz 411 where Franco publicly stated that he had ended up receiving a D in an acting class at NYU's Graduate Film School. This interview and Franco's statements resulted in a big controversy because Franco, especially at that time, had a very loyal fan base. And the professor ended up speaking out about Franco, and there even was a defamation lawsuit. The NYU professor was named Jose Santana, and he clarified that Franco got this bad grade in a course called Directing the Actor, which was even more embarrassing for Franco because he was becoming a director at this time. And the professor also ended up saying that Franco had not earned legitimately any of his grades, and all of the degrees that were being bestowed upon him were completely influenced by the fact he was an A-list celebrity, and it really was what a lot of people thought, and he wasn't really doing any of these degrees or the work for them. Franco was absolutely furious by this professor's statements and ended up doing multiple interviews where he absolutely slated the professor and his teaching abilities and just talked about it extensively. In September 2012, after Professor Santana had been dismissed from his faculty position at NYU, he filed a defamation lawsuit against Franco, asserting that Franco's public statements were false and had contributed to his termination. Exactly 1 year later, in September 2013, the lawsuit was settled, and defamation, settling a case like that, I mean, it's not even easy to get a case that far when it comes to defamation, especially in the US. So this is all going on through the early 2010s, and in Hollywood there were stories circulating of James Franco going after teenage girls who were extras on some of his movies, and also using social media to contact them and pursue them. There was a wide range of allegations against him, but all of them had this through line of sexual harassment and coercion. James Franco was accused of inappropriate touching and grabbing and taking women's hands and putting them on himself. Franco would also offer students roles in exchange for certain acts, and he began teaching intimate scenes, but he wasn't really teaching anything. He was using this as a guise to inappropriately touch women, put them in situations that he wanted to, and as he says in his own class, cross lines.
Let's cross some lines, you know what I mean? And then see how you deal with it. Either you like it or you don't, or something comes out of it. But I would definitely cross some lines.
There were many women who spoke about being alone with Franco, and when they were supposed to be auditioning for a part or even being in a role in one of his films, and they said instead he would force their hands on him or push their head towards certain body parts and pressure them into performing certain acts. Franco wasn't just satisfied with allegedly sexually harassing these women, he went on to other horrendous behavior. Just like the story with Busy Phillips, there were other behind-the-scenes stories of Franco being inappropriate with female actresses that didn't involve harassment. The vast majority of people who've spoken about working with Franco had extremely bad experiences with him outside of his core group of friends and frequent collaborators like Seth Rogen, Jason Segel, his brother, and Judd Apatow. Emma Watson, as I mentioned earlier, worked on the movie This Is the End with Franco, Rogen, and the usual group. Emma Watson's poor treatment on the set of This Is the End wasn't just reserved to Franco, though. There was also an incident with Channing Tatum where he and Seth Rogen wanted Emma Watson to appear in this scene that involved sexual innuendos and cannibalism, and there also would be Channing Tatum on a leash that Emma Watson would be holding. Emma said she was not comfortable with the scene, politely declined to do it, and left the set for that day. She returned the next day to say goodbye to everyone on the production, and she went on to promote the film as normal. It really isn't a wonder that Emma Watson didn't want to do this movie. It was only a few years after Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows had wrapped, and Emma was still in her early 20s. She was one of the most famous child actors of all time, and there was a countdown to her 18th birthday by absolute creeps, and there was actually a paparazzi who waited outside her 18th birthday party so that when she came out after midnight, she had already turned 18, and this paparazzi then lay down on the pavement so that he could take a picture of her skirt. So you can imagine she maybe didn't want to do this scene because she probably was thinking about all of the creeps that would get a hold of the scene, probably even Photoshop it and things. So it's not really rocket science why she didn't want to do it. Several people from the movie dressed this up into a big thing as if Emma Watson was some sort of diva that didn't want to do this scene and that she was some sort of poor sport. And James Franco was someone who repeated this narrative a lot. And he even went as far as when Franco was interviewing his friend Mila Kunis, he ended up telling the story, and Mila Kunis just really piled it on and talking about how, she would have done it. Mila Kunis, in my opinion, and I've talked about her and looked into her extensively, I've got many videos about her and Ashton Kutcher. She is someone who is not a girl's girl and is one of those, oh, I'm only friends with guys. And in this interview where she's with Franco, they really, really pile on Emma Watson, and they don't actually say Emma Watson's name, but it's so obvious who it is because there's not really a lot of women in that movie, and just a lot of the kind of clues that they give, it's obviously Emma Watson. And they just really make this something that it wasn't. And Seth Rogen even came out and said, people need to stop with this narrative. Like, she didn't want to do the scene. She didn't do it. It wasn't a big deal. And Seth Rogen even said that he actually liked what they ended up doing instead better than the original scene. And again, she was like in her early 20s. These actors are all a lot older than her, and it is really poor form, in my opinion, to do that, especially as Mila Kunis probably could understand a bit of what Emma Watson was going through. And it just seems like I'm going to push this person down to try and make myself look better because I would have done the scene because I'm a cool girl. And Emma Watson seems to be one on a very long list of young actresses who had a horrendous experience with James Franco on set.
You worked with Dylan O'Brien, Zac Efron, Dirty Grandpa, Glenn Powell.
That's a good marry fuck kill, honestly.
Yeah, there's more that you could add to the list. Yeah. And I got a kill for you.
Yeah. Take guesses or you just tell us?
You could guess.
It's very obvious she wants to kill somebody. Oh, James Franco.
Water.
Oh, good. Yeah, duh.
There is actually a James Franco and Ashton Kutcher lost movie. It's not really lost, but it's just not a movie that was ever released and probably isn't going to be released because James Franco was actually his movie that he was directing and producing. Ashton Kutcher was cast in it. It's called The Long Home. Josh Hartnett is in it too. And it was supposed to be released just after all of the accusations came out about James Franco that we're going to talk about now. And I don't know whether this is true. I've heard this from a few people, so take it with a grain of salt because I don't have like concrete evidence that it's true. But I always heard that Ashton Kutcher did that movie with Franco because Mila Kunis and James Franco were such good friends, which keeps with the pattern of Mila Kunis and Ashton Kutcher's friends. And Ashton Kutcher and James Franco didn't get on at all. And Mila Kunis saw this as an opportunity for Ashton Kutcher to get to know the real James Franco and befriend him through doing this movie. And I mean, they probably would be good friends, again, based on all of the other absolute creeps that Ashton and Mila are best friends with. Mila Kunis and James Franco have been friends for well over a decade. They did Oz the Great and Powerful, which was a big mainstream movie, but it really didn't do well box office or reviews wise. But they did also do many other little side projects as friends. I know there was a reenactment of the show The Hills, yes, the reality show The Hills, that the two of them did as like a two-person performance art piece. I think it was only on for like one night. And most of their other projects outside of things like Oz do seem to be projects they've done as friends to garner a lot of positive publicity rather than things that they want to actually release into the mainstream. Franco did repeat this story about Emma Watson and feed into it a lot, but he also allegedly made Emma Watson very uncomfortable on set by making countless creepy comments towards her and tried to pursue her. And when she made it clear that was not going to happen, James Franco became extremely angry and was quite rude and like aggressively rude towards her through the rest of the production, and allegedly would go out of his way to make Emma Watson feel uncomfortable. This Is the End came out in 2013, and The Interview, the movie with Seth Rogen that he did that caused the Sony hack, that came out in 2014. And during those 2 years, James Franco was in 28 productions, movies, or TV shows. And yes, some of them were cameos and stuff, but that's an insane amount of productions. He also was apparently doing his 127 Degrees, and he also was doing plays like Of Mice and Men. Of course, he had a lot of access to young people through all of his university and college courses. He also had a lot of younger people in his movies and TV shows, extras, small parts. He also had his acting school where he was casting young people or saying he was casting young people, and then they weren't really cast in things, or they had these like extra roles that he had said were something much more. And another way that he was picking up young people was through these plays that he was doing. It's kind of traditional. Not all actors do it, especially like not a lot of the big Hollywood stars, where they may do it some of the nights, but they will go to the back door, the stage door, and they'll sign playbills and take selfies with some of the fans who've gone back there in the hopes of meeting them. And James Franco would frequently use this as an opportunity to prey on his young fans. There was an absolute viral story that happened in 2014 with a 17-year-old girl who had met Franco at the stage door, and she'd actually recorded like a little video, and Franco keeps saying to her over and over again in the video, tag me in that, tag me in that, tag me in that. And so when she did tag him in it later, she was actually staying in New York, like close to where the play was. He immediately started DMing her, and he asked her how old she was and where she was staying. And she said she was 17, she was from Scotland, and she was staying, I think it was a Hilton in Times Square. And Franco sees she's 17, sends a selfie because she didn't, might not believe it was him. And then he ends up just saying, oh, will I book a room at the hotel? And she replies being, again, a bit skeptical that it's him. And so he again sends another selfie, and she had said, oh, write out my name and like take a picture with my name on a sheet of paper. And he does that. So he had like no recourse of denying this was him. And he again is just like, oh, will I come to the hotel? And when she seemed to not be interested in the 35-year-old man booking a hotel room, he basically was like, okay, bye. Text me if you want me to book a hotel room. The young girl ended up posting the screenshots of the messages and like sharing them with her friends, and the story very quickly went viral. And the next day, Franco was already scheduled to appear on Live with Kelly and Michael. And when he came out to the live show, he addressed the story and also put out a statement that was in a very similar vein to what he said on Kelly and Michael. He, of course, sidestepped what actually happened and the fact that the girl was 17 and that he knew that, and he acted like he'd just been exposed for contacting a fan and people posting it online.
Social media is tricky, it's a way people meet each other today.
He went on about how it's so hard for people to meet anyone, but when you're a celebrity, oh, it's so difficult, and your messages can get exposed and everybody knows that you're trying to meet someone.
Unfortunately, in my position, I have a very good life, but not only do I have to go through the embarrassing kind of rituals of meeting someone, sometimes if I do that, it gets, published for the world. So now, it's like doubly embarrassing.
And he was so new to this whole social media thing, which is absolute bullshit.
I'm new to it. It's like, you don't know who's on the other end.
And at no point do Kelly Ripa and Michael ask a question, push back, like clarify, mention anything. They just let him spew this very twisted version of the story, leaving out all of the key details. And then Kelly makes it even worse by just jokingly saying, oh, I won't expose our messages, and then moves on.
And I think it happens to movie stars on a much grander scale, like you just said, because everybody knows who you are.
Honesty and just being and not avoiding anything is always the best policy.
It's things like this, which is why he was able to get away with his behavior for so long because other people sidestepped things or blatantly ignored things or just let him manipulate the situation. So Franco was able to put out his narrative, and really these messages and the story were primarily shared online. So most people didn't even know about it, or they only heard James Franco's version of it, which was, oh, he's just a poor celebrity that was exposed for trying to message a fan. There was even jokes about this in SNL after this all happened. Seth Rogen and Franco were hosting the show, and literally Seth Rogen goes on stage and says that he pranked Franco by pretending to be a very young girl and trying to set up a hotel meet. And then Franco comes on and says, oh, I've been waiting at the hotel for 3 days.
I decided to prank James Franco. I posed as a girl on Instagram, told him I was way young. He seemed unfazed. I have a date to meet him at the Ace Hotel.
They're being so blatant about it and even joking about it on SNL. That's how confident they were that people didn't care. There were absolutely no repercussions for this story going viral. Everything continued on like normal for Franco. In fact, things got better and better for Franco. He opened his school, his acting school, Studio 4, and he had locations in LA and New York. And this school focused a lot on intimate scenes, which put a pin in that for just a minute. And he also continued with all of his projects and going to all of these various universities and colleges. He also started being like a visiting professor at many of the colleges and universities that we've mentioned and many other ones. And he also even started teaching high schoolers, which Vanity Fair covered and praised him for. In 2015, Franco starts working on a film called The Disaster Artist. It was at multiple points called The Masterpiece, but it was released under The Disaster Artist, even though it's referenced in like some interviews. Like I might show a clip of Bryan Cranston and James Franco doing the Hot Ones interview and they call it The Masterpiece in this, but it's the same movie. The Disaster Artist is about the making of what most people believe is the worst movie ever, called The Room. Franco ended up directing, producing, and starring in The Disaster Artist, and there were a lot of his friends and frequent collaborators in this movie as well. His brother Dave Franco was in the other lead role. Seth Rogen was in it, Judd Apatow, Megan Mullally, Josh Hutcherson, Zac Efron, Alison Brie, who is married to Dave Franco, Sharon Stone, and many, many others. The Disaster Artist came out in 2017, and Hollywood itself absolutely loved it. Franco got enormous praise from inside the industry, and he won his second Golden Globe for his performance in it. Outside of the industry, it was a pretty mixed reception from reviewers and audiences. I wouldn't say it was like a massive hit, but it wasn't like a bomb either. Franco was involved in another lawsuit around this time over the movie as well, so this is the second lawsuit in a few years, and the big one is about to come. And this was over the original script for The Disaster Artist, which he had one of his students, Ryan Moody, write. And Franco, according to Moody, lied and manipulated to get the script from him. And he even used some of Ryan's original ideas and original scenes. And he told Ryan to begin with that it was he, Seth Rogen, and Evan Goldberg, Seth Rogen's frequent writing partner that I mentioned at the beginning. See, there is usually a method to the madness, and I'm mentioning them for a reason. Not all of the time, but most of the time. And they said to Ryan that they wanted a more experienced scriptwriter on the film, and so they offered him an associate producer's credit instead. They ended up paying Ryan Moody only $5,000 for the script, which is way below the Writers Guild minimums, and they also didn't credit him as an associate producer. He didn't even find this out until the movie came out. The lawsuit ended up being settled, and just like the defamation one, these lawsuits aren't easy to bring into court. So in January 2018, Franco goes to the Golden Globes and, as I said, picks up his second Golden Globe for Best Actor. At this time, the Me Too movement had just begun 2 months prior, and there was a massive, massive discussion around the industry about At the Golden Globes that year, nearly all of the celebrities wore a small Time's Up pin. Some of the celebrities wore it because they truly stood behind the message and the movement, and then there were other celebrities that wore it because their publicist told them to. And many didn't even have the forethought or the care to ask, what is this pin I'm wearing for? And it resulted in many embarrassing moments when certain male celebrities who had just wore it because their publicist said to, were asked about the movement and about the pin.
I guess I believe,
Please be aware, one, I have sped this clip up and I left those ums and ahs in because there's about 20 seconds of that, of just dead air and him saying and ah. But if I leave all of that in, I'll get copyright claimed. So what you're about to see is sped up, so it dragged out a lot longer. And Franco certainly wasn't the only one who had an answer like this, that he says absolutely nothing because it's clear he doesn't know what Time's Up is about or means or anything. David Harbour's the other person who probably had the second worst answer next to Franco, but that might just be because it's fresh because I just did a Stranger Things video. But there were plenty of them who clearly had no clue what it was about and could not care less.
Anytime any group is treated differently or, given, less rights or, less equality than any other, it's everyone's responsibility to stand up and make change. And so that's why I'm wearing the pin.
Time's up on
Sexual harassment.
Even worse than not knowing about it were the celebrities who wore the pins and weren't supporters, but were the exact alleged perpetrators that Time's Up and Me Too were talking about. When Franco took the stage to accept his Golden Globe, he was wearing one of these Time's Up pin that was given to him by Scarlett Johansson, who actually, after all of these allegations came out, called him out and said, I want my pin back. And seeing Franco not only being so celebrated, but being so blatant as to deliver his speech with a Time's Up pin after all of the things that he'd done, a lot of women couldn't take the hypocrisy. Ali Sheedy, who's most well known for her role in The Breakfast Club and who's worked with Franco before, put out a tweet saying, James Franco just won. Please never ask why I left the film industry. She followed it up with 2 more tweets, the second being, okay, wait, by Christian Slater and James Franco at a table at the Golden Globes. And the third tweet was, why is James Franco allowed in the building? Ali's tweets, screenshots of them after she deleted the tweets, and the story in general spread very quickly and prompted other women to speak out about Franco. A lot of his former students were the ones that spoke out, especially on Twitter, and they were going over his horrendous behavior and his treatment of them. The virality of the story was helped by the fact that Me Too and Time's Up were happening at the time and were such big stories in the mainstream media and on social media. It also helped that so many other women spoke out and their tweets and Instagram posts and everything went viral as well, with the 2 biggest stories coming from Violet Paley and Sarah Tither Kaplan, who were both students of Franco's at Studio 4. The Golden Globes was on January 7th, 2018, and when Franco's name was called and he accepted his award, walked on stage, that was probably the highest point of his career. He had everything going for him that we've discussed in this video, all the projects and the schools and awards and degrees, and he also was winning his second Golden Globe for a film that he starred, produced, and directed, and he'd spent 2 decades working to this moment. He also had a lot of Oscar buzz around him as well, and add in that he was filthy rich and extremely famous. He walked on that stage at the peak of his career, but by the time he walked off the stage, his downfall had really began. Ali Sheedy's tweet and James Franco's former students' tweets and Instagram posts went so viral, and more accusations kept rolling in through January 8th and January 9th. And also the story from 2014 that we discussed started resurfacing as well. And all bunched together, it was pretty damning. There was black and white proof of a lot of it too, especially the whole situation with the minor and all of those selfies that he sent. There also were a number of other situations that came up, like all of these weird Instagram posts that he's put, all of the videos of him at parties with all of these college students, and just other stories started coming out. It seemed like people had been waiting for this moment with Franco because it seemed as though a lot of people over the years had stories about Franco that were pretty horrendous. Most of the accusations centered around him being manipulative as a teacher or mentor and promising roles or career opportunities that were tied to the students performing intimate scenes, and these things never materialized. Pressure to perform certain acts on camera, and many of the women spoke about his power and influence, and that was, again, in the classroom and on set, and how this kind of prevented them from speaking up, from saying no, and also from telling their stories later. Of course, Franco denied everything. His attorney issued a statement saying that he denied all allegations, and Franco then the next day went on the Stephen Colbert show and he said that the reports weren't accurate, but said that he did support giving people a voice. Up until the Golden Globes, James Franco was absolutely a contender for Best Actor at the Oscars, especially after he won the Golden Globe. I mean, it'd be very, very unusual, and I think there's only a few times it's happened that someone wins a Golden Globe and isn't nominated in the Oscar category. But given all the accusations, he wasn't nominated for an Oscar, and the campaign for the Oscars for The Disaster Artist pretty much died. The next day, on January 9th, 2018, things got even worse for Franco when the Los Angeles Times published a very damning investigation into all of the accusations surrounding him, and they spoke to 5 different women who all accused him of inappropriate and sexually exploitive behavior. 4 of the women were former acting students at Studio 4, and one of the women was a filmmaker that Franco mentored. This prompted more women to share their stories after the LA Times article was published, and this is also when Scarlett Johansson did her "I Want My Pin Back" speech. Hi guys, Editing Ash and Editing G here, and we're jumping in because I want to redo this little section because I went on way too long of a tangent about it, and I usually have to do these because I've like found out more information or something, but no, I need to briefly tell you about the absolute hypocrisy of this clip with Scarlett Johansson. Again, while I do appreciate that she's calling out James Franco, someone that she knows, and everything like that, I just can't help but wish she had that same energy for Woody Allen, who she very much still works with and still openly discusses that she works with and has no problem with. And I also just wanted to mention this verbally because I know a lot of people either are just listening on audio or they're doing something when they have the video running, so they might miss this, and it is very quick, so you could easily miss this. But Scarlett Johansson is giving this speech, and there's a woman holding the microphone for her, and the last 20 seconds, maybe even less, someone else comes up and takes over and holds the microphone for her, and it is Mila fucking Kunis. And I just am like, these are the people that are on stage, the Woody Allen fan and the letter writing connoisseur for Danny Masterson, Mila Kunis. And frequent visitors to the channel will know that I have done extensive videos about Ashton and Mila, and it's not just that they are best friends for 3 decades with Danny Masterson and wrote the judge letters trying to get leniency for him even though he's convicted of violent rape, but they're also very good friends with Diddy, and were even at his parties just a few years ago, maybe even more recent, but I just don't have any proof of that. And they also are very close friends, and Ashton is business partners with Ron Burkle, the billionaire, who is the godfather to Diddy's children, is friends with Harvey Weinstein, was on the Epstein list, and has a plane that he flew around with Bill Clinton that they called Airfuck One. And this Ron Burkle guy and Ashton Kutcher, I'll link my video about Thorne and their businesses and stuff below that goes into this. And I am doing a video soon about even more crazy stuff with these businesses that I've been looking into. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that because honestly, you cannot make this shit up. Like, if I didn't show you a clip of this, you probably wouldn't believe me. But I just, I don't even know what to say anymore. It's literally, you can't make this up, how all these people are connected. But anyway, back to Past Me.
I want my pin back, by the way.
Franco's team goes into massive damage control at this point and starts issuing denials, and they also start getting a ton of articles and videos taken down because he used to post loads of stuff on his YouTube and Instagram and even stuff teaching from the studio, which I'm sure I'm showing you clips of. And even when I was looking into this video and pulling up old articles, I had to use the Wayback Machine so much. And as always, all of the links and sources are in the Google link in the description box in the pinned comment. But this video is probably the one that I've had to go to the Wayback Machine for the most, outside of the Danny Masterson and Ashton Kutcher videos. A few days later, on January 11th, an actress who'd worked on lots of James Franco, Seth Rogen, and Judd Apatow projects spoke out about her experience on The Disaster Artist and what she'd heard behind the scenes. Charlene Lee, who's an actress who was in Knocked Up, This Is 40, and she was in over 22 episodes of House. She played Dr. Park, so a lot of people might know her from that, but she's done a ton of shows and movies, and she ended up speaking out on social media about wanting to quit The Disaster Artist and the role that she had in it over the Franco allegations when the ones about the minor came out, and she was actually offered a bigger role in the movie to just not say anything and stay on the project. Charlene was told Franco had changed and worked on himself, but Charlene said that wasn't true, as she could see it with her own eyes, and she'd only heard 2 weeks prior about a new victim of Franco's. Charlene has spoken several times about Franco and the allegations over the years since this happened, and she specifically mentioned him being enabled by those around him. At this time, this was all happening in 2018, as I mentioned, and Seth Rogen did in 2018 say he would continue working with his friend Franco, but has since gone back on this, and in recent years had said it's a deliberate choice that he's not working with him now, and he doesn't intend to in the future. When Seth Rogen first said he wasn't going to work with Franco anymore in 2021, Charlene then posted on her social media and directed it at Seth Rogen, saying that he should apologize for his comments and all of the things he said about Franco, and that he would continue to work with him back when the women were putting out their initial accusations. From 2018 onward, more and more accusations came out about Franco, and he continued to deny them all. He slowly was pushed out of most of his projects. As I mentioned, there was that project that he worked on with Ashton Kutcher and Josh Hartnett that was absolutely finished, but they shelved it over all of the accusations. What I don't think gets spoken about enough is that yes, he hasn't been on any mainstream project since 2019. There was one that continued with him that I'll talk about in just a sec. But usually, yes, sometimes people will make the decision at studios or directors or whatever to say, oh, I don't want to work with this person because they did this, they did that. But a lot of the time, probably more often than people doing it for moral reasons, is the fact that they can't get coverage insurance-wise. Most movies, they need to do something called completion bonds, which is just like insurance, and oh, the movie has to be finished at this time and for this amount of money. And when allegations come out like this, the actor is labeled high risk. So it can mean the insurance is either extremely high or pretty much impossible to get. And so that's why a lot of people disappear, more so than I think moral issues. And that's why a lot of people that do have accusations continue on with careers. As I said, in 2021 is when Seth Rogen said he wouldn't work with Franco anymore, and this is when Franco settled his most recent lawsuit, the one I alluded to earlier, and this was definitely his most publicly known lawsuit, and this was over the accusations. A year after all of the allegations came out, 2 of his prior students filed a civil lawsuit against him. The lawsuit accused Franco of exploitation, abusive power, and fraud linked to promises of certain roles that never materialized. The former students argued that Franco's school enabled an environment of coercive behavior, and Franco's Studio 4 closed shortly after the initial lawsuit was filed in 2019. Over the course of the lawsuit, there were many students who said Franco offered them bonus scenes for their coursework, and these always were very explicit scenes that Franco asked them to do under the guise of saying, yes, if this happens, it will help you with your coursework, and I'll promise you X role in either a movie I'm in or a project that I'm working on as a director or a producer. And again, they never materialized. The lawsuit, which was filed in 2019, was settled in 2021 for $2.2 million. One project did keep Franco on, and that was HBO's The Deuce, where he played not one character, but 2. Maggie Gyllenhaal was a producer and the star of the show, and she's been asked many times, why did you keep him on? Why did you give him a platform still? And she said anytime she's addressed it, she said that she read the LA Times article and then she's given various horrendous answers that pretty much amount to, yes, I read the article. I didn't think that we should stop my show. And I checked with all the women on set and they were cool with it, so it's okay. The Deuce ended in 2019, and that was James Franco's last mainstream role. He didn't do anything from 2020 to 2024, but the last 2 years he has done a handful of projects, albeit not big, not mainstream ones, but he has done several projects. He's done a lot of interviews and press during these years too, where he did admit to just sleeping with students, but the other stuff he said isn't true or is exaggerated or out of context, and he's apparently started dating someone who's made everything change, and he's changed, and he's doing the whole PR, I've changed, I'm a different person, that wasn't me, that was the old me. And I find it really hard to believe that he has changed because he hasn't taken any accountability, and also because he still is randomly showing up in TikToks at random parties of, albeit they look in their 20s, but still college age students, and all of these TikToks, which I will show you on the screen, there'll be things like, oh, when James Franco randomly shows up at your party, because it was always rumored that he would sit at like a lot of the Starbucks that lots of NYU students or the Columbia students would go to, and that's where he heard about a lot of these parties. So I wouldn't be surprised if he was still doing those things because he doesn't have much else to do. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if he did some sort of redemption campaign or tried something to come back into the mainstream. He has a ton of money and a lot of connections. Maybe a lot of those connections are severed now, but he still has a lot of money and a lot of PR power and all of that. And so who knows if it would work, but I definitely wouldn't be surprised if there was an attempt at least. For almost 30 years, Seth Rogen has had a hugely successful Hollywood career, and to some, he can do no wrong. But to others, Rogen isn't the easygoing guy he portrays on screen, and instead is someone who would stop at nothing to get what he wants. As an award-winning actor, writer, and producer, today Seth Rogen is one of the busiest men in Hollywood, but throughout his rise, Rogen was surrounded by a core group of friends and collaborators, often referred to as the Apatow Frat Pack. Many of these members have faced horrendous accusations in recent years, with the worst of these being about Seth Rogen's best friend in Hollywood and most frequent on-screen collaborator, James Franco. Over the last few years, after initially standing by Franco, Rogen distanced himself both publicly and professionally, and Rogen's career has been on an absolute upward swing since. The professional breakup of Rogen and Franco seems to largely have been ignored by the mainstream media, which isn't really a surprise given how connected both Rogen and the Apatow crew are, along with Rogen's slick PR and ties to many studios and projects worth billions. So that's what we'll be discussing today. Seth Rogen's behavior behind the scenes, the accusations that he turned a blind eye for almost 3 decades to the behavior of his longest and oldest collaborator and best friend, and whether he's really who he portrays himself to be. Seth Rogen is one of the most successful celebrities of the last 25 years, but his name might not come to the front of a lot of people's minds when they think of big Hollywood stars who have produced a massive catalog of movies and TV shows, and someone who has raked in a unbelievable amount of money, because although he does still act and appear in both films and on television, he has done a lot more behind the scenes as a producer, an executive producer, a writer, and a director. And his kind of story in Hollywood and how he's perceived by the general public is very split, because you have people on one side that think he is this lovable goof who can do no wrong, and on the other side, you have a lot of people who think that he knew a lot more about his friend's behavior and what was going on behind the scenes on so many of the projects that he was involved in through his rise in Hollywood and throughout the first decade and a half of his career. Seth Rogen has had an unbelievable rise throughout Hollywood, and if you look at the last couple of years, especially the last year, he really has just gone from strength to strength. He's won countless awards recently for his Apple series, The Studio. He has produced an unbelievable amount of movies and TV shows in the last decade, and he is attached to some really big projects that are so successful for the networks or the streaming services or the film studios that they're being produced by. And it's not like he's just partnered with Netflix or he's just partnered with Amazon. He really is involved with a plethora of studios. And Rogen is one of those people that has worked with practically everyone. And although there are still people that really don't have great things to say about him, there are equally as many people saying that they absolutely love him. And it's really the same, as I mentioned, with the general public. He really is someone who people seem to fall on one of two sides. And I think that his career in general is very interesting, but also his involvement with the Apatow crew and his blow up in Hollywood attached to all of these people, many of which have gone on to be not only controversial, but have had horrendous allegations come out about them from a lot of the projects that Seth Rogen was not only attached to as an actor, but very involved with as a producer, writer, and director. Seth Rogen's most famous on-screen partnership is with James Franco, someone who's had an avalanche of controversies and allegations come out about him in the last 7 to 8 years. His allegations have been around for a lot longer than that, but they've been covered in the mainstream media after the Me Too movement and over the last almost decade, with Franco largely being expelled from Hollywood. Although he has been attempting a bit of a comeback lately, he has been popping up in low budget and smaller projects lately, and even starting to go back on the media circuit and even answering a lot of questions about the ending of his friendship and professional relationship with Seth Rogen. I have done a video on James Franco's allegations, which I will leave linked in the sources along with everything else that I'm using to make this video, interviews, clips, articles, all of that stuff. in the Google link in the pinned comment and description box. But we will be touching on the James Franco stuff, but from the side of Seth Rogen. And I have also done a video about Jonah Hill, who's another person in this Apatow crew. And there might be some future people that I'll be discussing, which I will touch on some of their controversies a little bit later in the video. James Franco might be Seth Rogen's most well-known visible collaborator, but his actual biggest collaborator and longest collaborator is his childhood best friend, Evan Goldberg, who he actually met when he was in bar mitzvah class when he was living in his native Canada, and they became friends, and they actually started writing Superbad when they were 13 years old, and that was the first project they worked on together, and they still are working on projects to this very day, doing the vast majority of their projects together, and they co-produce, co-write, co-direct pretty much everything together that Seth Rogen is involved with behind the scenes. And Evan Goldberg is someone who might pop up here and there, but he largely stays behind the camera. And Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg have started their own production company, and they both truly are involved in a staggering amount of movies and television shows through their production company, Point Grey Pictures. Seth Rogen was born on April 15th, 1982 in Vancouver, Canada, and he said that he grew up in a very left-leaning family that openly discussed pretty much everything. He actually was cast in Freaks and Geeks, the Judd Apatow show that did only run for one season, but produced an unbelievable amount of future stars: James Franco, Seth Rogen, Jason Segel, Busy Phillips, Linda Cardellini, and they also had a lot of talent behind the camera too, like Paul Feig and Judd Apatow, and the person responsible for casting is Allison Jones. And I have mentioned Allison Jones in several other videos because her CV resume is truly unbelievable. She has done casting for the biggest shows, movies, and she really, really is one of the most talented casting directors in Hollywood, bar none. I mean, even juggernauts like The Office, she was the person responsible for casting. And I would really, really be shocked if everyone watching this didn't have at least one TV show or movie that they really liked that Allison Jones was responsible for the casting. From the story that Seth Rogen tells, and he does have very, very slick PR, probably some of the best in Hollywood right now, he was cast from just a casting call in Canada when he was 16 years old. He did do stand-up comedy since he was 13, and my own kind of filling in the blank is I'm thinking that Allison Jones had something to do with him being aware of this casting call, or even just her seeing him at these stand-up comedy performances, because she has talked a lot about how back before social media and everything, she would go to all types of stand-up comedy performances, and that was pretty much what she did to get exposed to new talent. And she would go night after night in mostly, of course, LA, but like all over the place to get access to talent. And Seth Rogen was performing in these clubs since he was 13. His parents ended up moving from Canada to LA after he was cast on Freaks and Geeks when he was only 16. His dad had been let go from his job, and his mom quit her job to move to LA with Seth Rogen. And by the time he was 18 and his parents moved back to Canada, his dad said to him, "You've made more money in these few years than I've made all my life total." So Seth Rogen at this stage, he'd done Freaks and Geeks for one season. The show, although it is a cult classic and very beloved, it didn't go on further than one season. After Freaks and Geeks, Seth Rogen had become very close with Judd Apatow, despite Apatow being nearly 20 years older, and Rogen was 16, 17, 18 during this time. And Apatow actually gave him a part on his next show, Undeclared, and also had him as a writer. And although this show didn't really go anywhere, he was a writer on over a third of the episodes and wasn't even in his 20s yet. He was still working on Superbad throughout this time, even though Evan Goldberg was at college and they were kind of working on it just always in the background, with their ultimate goal being to get Superbad made and to star in it themselves, given that the characters are Seth and Evan and their other friend, who is of course McLovin. And although the Undeclared show wasn't successful on television, it did give him these writing credits, and that is a big door opener because it gets you into the Writers Guild. And it's also giving you an acting and writer's pay packet. And so after this back-to-back Apatow projects that just lasted a year, Seth Rogen largely didn't really work for a few years, but he said that he had made quite a lot from those shows. So he just focused on Superbad and like other writing. After a few more years, Rogen was cast in another Apatow project, The 40-Year-Old Virgin, in a sort of supporting role. And then in 2007, he was given the lead role in Knocked Up. Knocked Up also starred Katherine Heigl, who was at the height of her Grey's Anatomy fame. And this era was really when the Apatow films were really big as well. And this movie was massive. This came out when I was a freshman in college, and I remember it just being really, really huge. And this kind of turned Seth Rogen into a really big star overnight. And Rogen being involved in Knocked Up led to Superbad. While they were shooting Knocked Up, they continued to work on and even cast Superbad, and Jonah Hill having a small part in Knocked Up led to him being cast in Superbad, because by this time Seth Rogen had actually aged out of playing himself in Superbad, and he did have a smaller role, supporting role, as one of the cops. But Knocked Up came out in the beginning of the summer in 2007 and Superbad at the end, and so this summer in 2007 just completely changed things for Seth Rogen, and it really just was up from there. Within 12 months, Rogen did Knocked Up, Superbad, and his next film starring himself and James Franco, Pineapple Express, and this came out in 2008 and was another really, really big success. And although Franco and Rogen had done these other roles in Apatow's stuff together, this was the movie that put them together as two huge stars and two really close friends, and that was like a big thing with all the publicity of their movies going forward too. And this was just this 12-month period in 2007 to 2008 when both Rogen and Franco became megastars and were not just known as, for Rogen, like Freaks and Geeks stuff. And at the time, James Franco was a lot bigger too, because he, of course, was coming off doing all the Spider-Man trilogies. And this was kind of showing that he wasn't just this superhero actor. He wasn't just doing James Dean, which he won his Golden Globe for. It was showing he could do all sorts of things and was becoming really big in comedy, just like Rogen. What's really interesting about Seth Rogen's career is that he kind of grew as a writer, producer, and an actor at the same time. Usually people who enter into the acting fray have to work for much longer to get a shot at writing and directing and producing. But from The 40-Year-Old Virgin onwards, Seth Rogen was given a co-producer credit, and obviously he wrote Superbad, he did the screenplay for Pineapple Express, he was an executive producer on Knocked Up, and this was very common with Apatow, with giving his friends from the Freaks and Geeks cast much more say in the behind the scenes, and this was really how they got their shot, because outside of Apatow projects, Seth Rogen's writing credit was on 6 episodes of The Ali G Show, and from that onwards, really it was mostly Apatow co-produced productions for the first 10 years of his career. Of course, nearly all of Seth Rogen's projects were co-written and co-directed, co-produced with his friend Evan Goldberg. And from This Is the End in 2013 is when Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg started moving into directing. This Is the End involved lots of the Apatow crew, although it wasn't Apatow that directed or wrote it, it was Seth and Evan. And this movie, This Is the End, it actually had a lot of these people like James Franco, Seth Rogen, Jonah Hill, all playing fictionalized versions of themselves when an apocalypse is coming and they're all stuck at a party at James Franco's house. There are a lot of stories that have circulated about the set of This Is the End, and not only the poor treatment of crew, cast, everyone, from people like James Franco and Jonah Hill, but also putting actresses in uncomfortable situations, like the story that circulated about Emma Watson and her not wanting to do some of the things that she was being asked to do. Seth Rogen did come out and say this isn't true, because there was a lot of stories saying like Emma Watson stormed off set, and Seth Rogen said she didn't storm off set. She said she didn't want to do this thing. It wasn't a big deal, which I'm glad that he did that, because of course Emma Watson starts getting the brunt of it, and even people like Mila Kunis have not named her but made explicitly clear who she was talking about, and basically trying to say, oh, that's so uncool that she did that. I'm a cool girl and I would have done it, so what's the big deal? Which you know how I feel about Mila Kunis and Ashton Kutcher. See a lot of my previous videos for details. There's even this very strange interview that Mila Kunis did while her and James Franco were promoting Oz the Great and Powerful, and for the interview, Mila Kunis is interviewed by James Franco, and they go on for what seems like a very long time about this whole thing with This Is the End and Emma Watson, and again, making it very, very obvious who they are talking about, and they just really, really dig into her. And of course, I don't know this, I'm just speculating, but I wouldn't be surprised if this interview and Franco and Kunis talking about it so much, because I've seen them talk about it other places too, I wouldn't be surprised if this was what prompted Seth Rogen to speak out about it, or even Emma Watson, or more likely her team, said to Seth Rogen, hey, can you say something about this because it's making me look really bad? I really feel like the story about Emma Watson and This Is the End kind of attached to her for a long time, and people maybe didn't explicitly say this, but they really did use this as kind of a who does she think she is, or like some sort of diva or spoil sport, and her not wanting to do what she didn't want to do, when really knowing everything that even is just in the media about James Franco, Jonah Hill, about stuff that came out in the Sony hack, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and how these sets were run, I don't think it's too much of a leap to say that it might not have been the best environment, and I don't think that Emma Watson should have this kind of reputation as storming off set over a joke, when I'm sure that it wasn't exactly how it's being painted in the press. And I do also find it very interesting that a lot of these casts have individually worked together again, like Seth Rogen and James Franco worked together again, and as a group they worked on animated movies together. But after This Is the End and all of the stories from the set that followed, never again did this big group work on an actually shot on set films movie again. And maybe that's just a coincidence, but I do think it is something worth keeping at the front of your mind as we move through the rest of the 2010s and the rest of Rogen and Franco's projects together. But we'll get much more into how all of these people conducted themselves allegedly on set. In particular, James Franco and Seth Rogen's knowledge or apparently lack of knowledge about how James Franco conducted himself. So through the late noughties and the early 2010s, Seth Rogen could really do no wrong, with the exception of The Green Hornet, which was a movie that came out in 2012, the year before This Is the End, and it was Seth Rogen that wrote, produced all of that, along with Evan Goldberg. And just assume if I say Seth Rogen was producing, writing, directing, that Evan Goldberg was involved, because it'll be easier just to say the ones he wasn't involved with, which are very few, if any, honestly, in the past couple of years at least. And this Green Hornet movie, Seth Rogen also starred in as the Green Hornet. And he's talked a lot about how he and Evan growing up were like really into comic books. And this was at a time when comic books weren't really big. I've talked in another video about how at the time that like I was younger and a teenager, and I've always been into comic books too, and it was seen as not like a fringe thing, but it just wasn't mainstream like it is now. And Marvel Studios actually, well, it wasn't Marvel Studios and it was just Marvel. They had a tiny shared office with a hot air balloon company. Like this was a tiny operation, and in a lot of financial trouble. That's why we have the whole situation with Spider-Man, who ended up selling to Sony for, I think it was around 8 million, maybe that's with inflation. Actually, something really interesting that came out of the Sony hack, among many other things, was Kevin Feige's notes to Sony on The Amazing Spider-Man 2, like the Andrew Garfield one. And when you read these notes, it's like, oh, this man is very good at his job. I mean, that can be up for debate today, but when you read those notes, you're like, this is someone who is very, very accomplished and knows what they're talking about. I'm pretty sure there's still websites and things that have these notes up and stuff, so if I can find some, I'm sure I'll be able to. I'll leave them linked in the sources down below, because I know I have a lot of people who watch who are interested in production and that side of things, and they are really, really good to read. They didn't apply a lot of them to the movie, but and speaking of kind of comic book movies that could have been maybe done better than they were, as I was mentioning The Green Hornet, and I am going to correct myself in real time because I think I said The Green Hornet was in 2012, but it was actually 2011. And this came out at a similar time to The Green Lantern, which was another disaster of a comic book movie. So there was a lot of comic book movies with green in the title done by famous A-list actors who were moving more into producer writer roles at that time. And Seth Rogen, although he didn't really do much comic book adaptation stuff for a few years after The Green Hornet, I do think he and Evan Goldberg really, really did redeem themselves with comic book adaptations, and I'll get into that in just a second. But after this period in the early 2010s where he's done The Green Hornet, he's starting to do This Is the End, where he and Evan Goldberg are, as I mentioned, like writing, directing, all of that. That's really when, yes, he still does star in a lot of his productions, but he is at the helm of a lot of them. And he starts doing these movies like Neighbors and Game Over, and just very comedy movies. They're not gonna change anyone's life, but they do well, they hit the target audience. And then in the late 2010s is when he starts moving more into, I'd say, what he's known for more today, which is TV shows that are really well made and either win a lot of awards or are very popular, are very, very in the zeitgeist, massive pop culture shows. So after This Is the End, that's 2013, in 2014, there's a lot that happens. This is also around the time that there's the roast of James Franco, where Seth Rogen, Jonah Hill, Aziz Ansari, like all of that group do this roast of James Franco on Comedy Central. And when you watch it back now, especially, there's a lot of jokes about James Franco and the people he goes after, and there even was a Saturday Night Live situation where Seth Rogen makes a joke about James Franco going after very young fans. And that also came out of around this time in 2014, actually in April 2014, I think 2 days before, or no, about a week before I'm filming this, was 12 years since this happened. This happened the 1st of April, like going into the 2nd of April night. And that was that James Franco was exposed for very actively pursuing a young fan. And the young fan, who was from Scotland, she ended up posting the video of her meeting James Franco at the back of a stage door when he was doing a play. She took a short video where James Franco is excessively telling her to tag him in that, tag him in that. And then whenever she did so and went back to her hotel, he sent her a barrage of messages, sometimes multiple at once before she could even reply, asking her to meet him at a hotel. And is she in New York long? And how old is she? And she says she's 17. And he just keeps wanting to meet her at this hotel, which she doesn't end up going because she's with her mom and she's 17, and she didn't go because maybe she was seeing red flags. And this wasn't something that came out of nowhere by any means, because for years and years at this point, even in celebrity blinds, and as I always give the caveat, yes, you cannot believe everything that's in celebrity blinds, but if there's over a decade of dozens and dozens of blinds every month or two saying the exact same thing, it does kind of give you a bit of maybe there's some truth to this. And these allegations for harassment, for power dynamics, for sleeping with students, going after young fans, all of the things, they stretch back through all of his times at various colleges and universities, to different productions, just throughout Hollywood in general. And this was around the time that he'd been teaching for a few years, so it was starting to come out about that as well. And his productions in general, it was a pretty well-known rumor. And even if you look on some of these university websites and people's random social media, there'll be all these videos all the time of, oh, I'm at this random college party and James Franco's just shown up. Or there was always things about him going up to random students and asking for invites or asking where parties were. And at this stage, he is in his mid to late 30s, and these are regular college students. So that all is happening around the time of this roast, around the time Seth Rogen makes this joke on Saturday Night Live, which I'll play for you here, and it will be short because just copyright at the moment on YouTube is out of control, but you'll get the point.
I decided to prank James Franco. I posed as a girl on Instagram, told him I was way young. He seemed unfazed. I have a date to meet him at the Ace Hotel.
I definitely saw this at the time, and to me, and this is just like my interpretation of it, this was Seth Rogen defending James Franco or brushing it off as a joke, because James Franco also, when this started to come out, I don't think it ever really went massively mainstream. I do think it stayed quite online, maybe in a few outlets here and there, but I do find it very hard to judge how mainstream or how well-known stuff is, because I do follow this stuff so obsessively, like way even before I had a YouTube channel. And I do use my sisters and non-chronically online, like pop culture obsessed friends to kind of gauge stuff. And definitely they didn't really, as far as their memories were going, they didn't hear about a lot of this stuff back when it happened. But I think if you had heard anything and you weren't totally across the allegations, and you see this joke on Saturday Night Live, or all of James Franco's interviews that he went on after it happened, because he was in the middle of like press, both of them play it off as it was just an embarrassing situation because I tried to meet up with a fan, not because they were so young, and like how he was conducting himself throughout it, like, oh, just meet me at this hotel, like right now.
Social media is tricky, you know, it's a way people meet each other today. Not only do I have to go through the embarrassing kind of rituals of meeting someone, sometimes if I do that, then it gets, you know, published for the world. So now
it did kind of die down a lot because Seth Rogen and James Franco both have exceptional PR, and they have done this for a long time. They're very successful. They know what to say and do to calm things down and get people to look at whatever they want them to look at, whether it's a movie, show, whatever it may be. And so after that, there were a few more productions that Seth did in that kind of realm, like Neighbors 2 and stuff like that. But in 2017, he starts working on The Disaster Artist, which was James Franco's really big movie that he got a lot of accolades for, including winning the Golden Globe. He had won a Golden Globe in 2001 for his portrayal of James Dean. He won the Golden Globe for Best Actor in a miniseries. And The Disaster Artist, which came out in 2017, he starred in, directed, all of those things. And he also won the Golden Globe for Best Actor this time. I do go much more into The Disaster Artist and everything that happened with it in the James Franco video, because it was really the point of the allegations coming out and everything happening with James Franco, because this was when Me Too and Time's Up was happening, and it was when James Franco won the Golden Globe that night started all the allegations coming out, because he had a Time's Up pin and was on stage and accepting his award. And that's when a lot of people, including Ali Sheedy, who is most well known for The Breakfast Club, she tweeted out about James Franco, and then more stuff started happening. And so it really started like in the middle of the award season, and the assumption was always that this happening and all these allegations coming out is why the Disaster Artist kind of award sweep stopped dead in its tracks here, and James Franco wasn't nominated for an Oscar and things like that despite winning the Golden Globe. But this time when it happened, all these allegations coming out in very early 2018, because the movie came out in 2017, Seth Rogen and James Franco were still friends, and there didn't seem to be any intention of them not working together. It's just that James Franco didn't do anything for a while because, of course, the advice, I'm sure, was put your head down, don't say anything, don't address it, you know, don't do projects for a little bit while this dies down. And Seth Rogen really didn't say that he wouldn't work with James Franco or he wasn't friends with him anymore or anything until 2021. And there were people involved with many other productions who spoke out about James Franco and Seth Rogen knowing about James Franco. Hi guys, editing Ash and G here. Although it's not technically editing Ash and G, it is importing and dechunking Ash and G, which dechunking is my very technical fancy word for importing the footage, going through and taking out all my mistakes, and then cutting the video in half and sending half to my amazing editor, Evelyn Dar, and then I keep half. But I wanted to tell you that because it wouldn't make sense if I just said, oh, it's editing Ash and I forgot to put this in, because basically a little bit of audio got corrupted, and usually if it's like a word or something, then I'll just dub it. And you know, I hate dubbing because it never sounds the same. But this is like a minute, and we will just pick up straight away with because I literally just filmed this, like the lights and everything are still on. I still have like my filming makeup on and stuff, so not that this isn't my usual look. But anyway, the bit that I need to tell you is when all of this started coming out about James Franco, and it really was the Golden Globes that I think just pushed a lot of people over the edge, and then the few people speaking out just opened the floodgates, because James Franco was at the Golden Globes, he won a Golden Globe, he was being celebrated, he had a Time's Up pin on, and he very clearly had no fucking clue what Time's Up was, because he and David Harbour both were asked about it on the red carpet and like in the award circle and all that, and it it could not be more obvious. They didn't know what the fuck they were talking about. And I think all of it just pushed people over the edge, even though this was something that, in my opinion, was very well known for a very long time about him. But there was one person who spoke up in regards to the disaster artist, an actor called Loma Tuck, who, if you see me put headlines saying Charlin Yi, they have changed their name, I believe, to honor like their heritage and stuff. So they actually were kind of like a periphery Apatow crew person. They have been involved in a lot of, not a lot, but like a number of Apatow projects. Their first role was in Knocked Up. They were in This Is 40, and then they have done stuff like Paper Hearts, which is a movie they starred in with Michael Cera that they also wrote and composed the music of. And Seth Rogen was in that. So there's a lot of like crossover in projects too. And most people probably would know them from House MD. They were Dr. Park in that. And one other thing that I just want to mention before we go back to the video is that Loma Tuck has actually more recently come out with other allegations from the set of Apple's Time Bandits, which is done by Taika Waititi. And their claim was that they were like injured on set by another actor. I was not there or anything like that, so I'm just reading what has been reported on. And Apple did do a big investigation into all of these allegations, and they interviewed like pretty much everybody that was associated with the show and on set and stuff, because it was like a big scene, I believe. And Apple's conclusion was that everybody else said that this did not happen this way. I did just want to mention the Time Bandit thing because I thought people might have heard about it recently. So that was kind of like the missing bit of context, and we'll now cut back to a few minutes ago, me. And they also spoke about how they believed Seth Rogen knew about Franco's behavior. When they spoke out about Franco's behavior, they ended up being offered a bigger part and were told, oh no, that was the James Franco of the past and he's not doing any of that now and everything's fine, when the actor had actually heard about allegations within that week and said that there wasn't any change from everything that they knew and had been told about his behavior, and even on that production. I do just find it very interesting that the disaster artist had such huge names in it, and so many huge names. I mean, there's all like the usual Apatow crew people, but there's also Bryan Cranston, Megan Mullally, Kristen Bell, unbelievable lists of people involved with this production. And the person who ended up speaking out was someone who wouldn't be as well known as those names that I listed, because I imagine everybody else involved with the production was advised not to say anything. And if you see anybody really that had any sort of close relationship with James Franco, they aren't ever asked about him whatsoever. I ended up listening to, as I always do, like so many interviews and watching things with the person that I'm talking about. And I think I listened to 4, maybe it was even 5 hours of Armchair Expert with Seth Rogen, because he's done 3 episodes, and James Franco's name like doesn't come up once in all of that time. And there's no way that that's an accident. Like, even just saying, oh, you did that with James Franco, like it's always the name of the movie. And Jonah Hill and all these other people, like, well, they don't really mention Jonah Hill that much in the later episodes. And this is why I'm always saying that the art of the celebrity interview is dead today, because there's only really 2 types of celebrity interviews. One is done by influencers who have a big platform for most of the time, something that is nothing to do with celebrities, interviews, just no experience whatsoever, even in television, film, and they don't want to educate themselves on it. They don't want to become better interviewers because they are still getting the interviews and they're still getting plenty of money. So why would you work on your craft? And every single time those people get all the best interviews, and every single time there's frustration about how they ask no questions that are decent or pertinent, or just the interview is always squandered. And I'd love to know who you all think that applies to, because I can definitely think of a lot of names. Or you have the case that we have here, which is Dak Shepard is another celebrity, and he and his wife have worked on Seth Rogen productions, they've worked on their friends' productions, they're all in that same circle. And so, of course, they're not going to ask them any sort of question that Seth Rogen or the other celebrities don't want to be asked. They're going to tell them that they're absolutely wonderful. They're going to promote and mention their upcoming or latest project, and they'll hawk one of their products or whatever their latest other money-making thing is, and that'll be the end of it. And those are the two celebrity interview pipelines that we have today. They do all kind of protect each other in that way, because I believe the only time that it's really come up in recent times is when James Franco ended up doing like an interview recently, and he said had a great 20 years with Seth. I love him. He was like my best friend in the industry, and we did so many projects together. But yes, what Seth Rogen has said is our friendship is over and we don't have any intentions of working together again, because that is what Seth Rogen said in 2021. And when James Franco more recently did say, yeah, he's right, we don't have any intention of working together, but I still love him. Seth Rogen, his answer was, oh, it wasn't really on my radar that he'd said this, which I also find very hard to believe, because I think a lot of times people do kind of go to that to say, oh, maybe they didn't know. And I even see that with like a lot of influencer, like YouTuber people. But my experience anyway with anybody that's in any way like touching not even Hollywood stuff, but even just like online things, you nearly have to be chronically online. Like, I'm sure there's some people that maybe they do lifestyle content or something very, very far from talking about Hollywood drama and gossip and things. But I mean, when I say like I work on these videos like 24/7, like I absolutely do, because I 100% love it. Like, I am not in any way complaining. Like, if this wasn't my job, I'd still be doing it. But and I did for a long time before it was. But these people that they and I'm a small, YouTuber, these people are making millions and millions and billions of dollars, and they have machines behind them. They are apprised of everything that is going on, and if they aren't, there's someone that it's their job for them to come and tell them, hey, you're probably going to be asked about this, or hey, this person said this about you, or people are going to ask you about this thing that happened with some production that you're a producer on, but you're not like fully across anymore, because that's just the way things are. That's like not a knock on anyone. A lot of these projects, like Seth Rogen is a producer on The Boys, as is Evan Goldberg, and that's like one of my favorite shows. Actually, the new episodes came out today, and I'm like, oh, I can't wait to watch it tonight, hopefully whenever get done working on the video. So probably watching it like 1 a.m. But I absolutely love that show. But it's in its 5th season now, and Seth Rogen was very involved at the beginning with the casting, with the costumes, with getting it to the screen. But now, like, a lot of what he does is kind of oversee, and he'll pop up in a cameo. He might help them get cameos like Charlize Theron and stuff like that, but he's not there like day to day. Like, that's Eric Kripke, the showrunner's job. So say something happened with The Boys, like there was a big scandal. I do actually want to cover it, because I have heard, not even like through people, just like online, like a lot of stuff behind the scenes and some stuff with some of the lead actors. So I am interested in covering it. But that production, like if something did happen, Seth Rogen like absolutely would be brought up to speed on it, because he might be asked about it in an interview or anything. And so I just do not imagine somebody didn't say, hey, these comments were made about your most visible longtime collaborator and who had these horrendous allegations come out about them. And I also think that Seth Rogen is someone who is fairly in the know because, one, I don't think that you can be involved in so many productions and be so finger on the pulse in a lot of his stuff that he does now, especially like The Studio and The Boys. And he is someone who, when you see him on Twitter and replying a lot of the things on Twitter, he does seem to know like the general sort of way things are going. He also, in interviews, seems very well informed, or at least brought up to speed appropriately. And just in general, observing his career over the past almost 3 decades, my opinion is he has extremely, extremely effective, slick PR and also just a very effective team behind him. And that is probably a big part in why he is so successful because, yes, like he obviously is someone who produces great shows and movies and writes and directs and acts and everything like that. Maybe the acting, I think he is stronger as a writer and a producer, but I don't think you get to that level of success and having that level of success for so long, going on the upward trajectory for so long without all of the mechanisms in place behind the scenes for keeping all of the plates spinning. And that does include PR, marketing, all of these things. And even a lot of his like sound bites and things like that, and things that he does answer in these 2 or 3 questions from like Access Hollywood and stuff like that, they are always like bang on. And I do agree with like a lot of what he said about his earlier career, that he felt like he wasn't the most talented or like the most good looking or, you know, had the best charisma or any of these things, but he knew like he could outwork everyone else. And not that in any way I'm comparing at all, but I have kind of always felt that way, that like whether I worked in a restaurant like waiting tables or doing this or working in an office, like speak to anyone in the 9 million jobs that I've had, I always am someone who have always given like 110%, have done extra hours, like blah, 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 all those things, because that's just like my personality and how I work. And you know, you could go into the psychology of all of that. But I do think that Seth Rogen gives off this impression that, oh, I just kind of ended up here and I'm just this like happy-go-lucky guy, when I think he's much more strategic than that. And when the Sony hack happened in 2014, there did seem to be a bit more about how strategic and how things were going behind the scenes weren't quite how they were portrayed to be, because I kind of jumped over the 2014 situation so that we could go back a little bit after you had the full context of the James Franco situation, because the 2014 timeline, there was a lot going on. There was the allegations of James Franco, but there was also the Sony hack, which Seth Rogen has said in many interviews, like this was a huge, huge thing in his career, and it kind of knocked his confidence more than anything and just really had an impact on him, because it was something that everyone in the world was aware of, and it just had such like a knock-on effect for not only like him, but like a lot of the people he worked with. So I'm sure most people are even just vaguely aware that in 2014, Seth Rogen and James Franco did a movie called The Interview, and it's about journalists that were like TV reporters or TV hosts that were going to interview Kim Jong-un, and they were charged with assassinating him. And so the whole thing with the interview was, how is North Korea going to respond to this? Sentence How is North Korea going to respond to this? It's probably a sentence you didn't expect to hear in one of my videos about Hollywood gossip and drama. But they ended up having a fiasco with this movie because, to be honest, they still don't know 100% who did do the hack. And there's many theories. Most of the theories are that it was North Korea along with some disgruntled American Sony employees. That seems to be what Seth Rogen believes today. And the other thing is that Sony were warned that like this was a possibility, but they still kept like a folder called passwords that the hackers got into, and things just got even worse. And basically the hackers sent like a kind of phishing email that they tried to go into like a bunch of Sony Facebook accounts, like employee Facebook accounts. And when they did that, Facebook obviously fired the email saying, hey, someone tried to log into your account. Like, was it you? If not, reset your password. And they also, at the same time, the hackers sent an email that looked identical to the Facebook one, just hoping that if they blasted nearly everyone at Sony, that a few people seeing the two emails coming back to back would click on the wrong one, put their information in, they would be able to get their information. And then once they got into a few computers, they were able to spread through these types of viruses that they had. And they were able to get a shit ton of information and a shit ton of really embarrassing information too. Hardly anyone came out looking good in the Sony hack. I think like one of the only people who did is Rooney Mara, who her family are not like super tied to Tampa, but I can't even remember how I ended up in this situation. It was something to do with my dad's work, and this is when I was probably like maybe 20. It was before Kate Mara, her sister, had really done anything. And Kate Mara, that's an interesting person too. And there's a whole thing with one of the L Word actresses as well, Stephanie Moafi, who's on The Pit now. But I'll be here all day if I start on that. So I'll put a pin in that for some other time down the line. I'll try and find some sort of Kate Mara thing. She had a whole thing with Elliot Page too, but Rooney Mara, I ended up at some football something for my dad's work in like one of those like boxes, but it was the Mara family's box. I think they're like friends with the owner of my dad's old work. And I ended up meeting them. I think it was when Rooney had like just started, and my ex-girlfriend, her mom is also the lawyer for the Phoenix family. Lots of weird things. And of course, this has come from me literally just saying Rooney Mara was probably the only person that came off well in the hack. That she sent this really nice email that was like, hey, to Amy Pascal, who was one of like the head Sony execs. And it was years after she'd done the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. And she was like, I know it's been a long time, but just wondering if they're going to make any other of the books. People ask me about it all the time, and I think there's a lot of interest, and, I'd love to do it. And like, it was a really nice email, but that was kind of the only nice email from a celebrity. And the Sony execs came off very badly because, I mean, I'm sure most people wouldn't like to have their private emails and stuff come out. There are some things that people said that, they'll say, oh, it was in private and stuff, but it's like, yeah, I wouldn't say, I wouldn't even use some of those words because I don't use those words or say those things, private or not. But yeah, I mean, nobody wants their private stuff exposed. So in the Sony hack, like a lot of information came out about the interview. Like Seth Rogen was being paid $8.5 million, and he was directing and producing and everything. James Franco was paid like $6.4 million, but there also was their emails and what they were saying, and then what producers were saying about them. In emails to each other, Sony producers talked about how they thought that this film was another misfire by Franco and Rogen, and that they weren't really fans of the film. And there were lots of back and forth between Seth Rogen and Amy Pascal, who I said was the big Sony executive. And she was actually one of the only people who ended up being fired over this whole thing. But she still works with Seth Rogen on lots of stuff. Just a lot of the emails from Seth Rogen, it didn't seem like a person that's the easiest to collaborate with. And even when Sony were trying to give advice or with the context of what happened, because they seemed fully aware that something like this might happen. And Seth Rogen has even said that he was in meetings where they did say something like this might happen. So whenever the Sony executives were saying like, maybe let's tone this bit down or this scene, and they're not saying like, oh, completely remove this and stuff like that. He would make like a small adjustment and then sign off things like, is this over now? And are we done talking about this? And so I do think there is a lot of PR and marketing when it comes to this easygoing, like lovable guy, because I just don't think you can get to that level of success in Hollywood with being an easygoing, like super friendly guy. I do think the Sony hack is a super interesting topic. I have mentioned possibly doing a video on it because there's just so many bits that you would have to do a video covering all of them, because there's so many like little elements and mentions of this person, that person, and stuff like that. But I do kind of go back and forth in what I think happened, and that's why I would like to look into it more, because I do kind of agree with what Seth Rogen has said about it, that there probably was some element of North Korea involved, but there also, I just don't think that it's believable that it was entirely North Korea, because the people seemed so apprised of Hollywood, not only projects and everything, but Hollywood politics as well. And the information that they did release seemed so particular and strategic. And the movies that they released, like they didn't even release the interview. Like they released a bunch of other movies. Like they released 5 other movies that they'd taken from Sony in this hack, and they released a bunch of people's emails and things. Seth Rogen actually went to a bunch of people that he'd like talked shit about in emails and like told them about it, because he thought apparently that these emails were going to be exposed and like released to the press. And then there was this like whole campaign by Seth Rogen and James Franco, because the hack happened, they released these other movies, there was all these emails and everything spilling out, the press started to cover it a lot, and then Sony ended up pulling the interview, and they didn't release it in theaters, they released it online. And that happened when Seth Rogen was like behind the scenes at the Colbert Report, and so he ended up canceling like all of his interviews with the Project The Interview. And a lot of people will say like, oh, he did Colbert and stuff, but he already was there doing the interview when they ended up canceling the interview movie going to theaters. And so after there was this like period of silence, and I mean that's the go-to if you want to try and bury something or like move on from something, and not that people are totally entitled to do that, like I think that's the smart thing to do. And Seth Rogen and James Franco then started doing appearances where they would talk about it like on Howard Stern and stuff, and say, oh, the media kind of made this into a big thing and did exactly what the criminals wanted and blew it up into releasing all of these emails and stuff like that, when I think it's a much more like complicated topic than that. So taking all those things into account, that Seth Rogen and James Franco have worked on so many projects together. Most of the movies that Seth Rogen and James Franco worked on, if not all of them, Seth Rogen didn't have like a vanity producer credit. Like he was a writer, director, and an involved producer. It's not like The Boys, the show now, where, as I said, he was very involved in the beginning, but maybe not so much now. But I find it very difficult to believe that you wouldn't know anything about the James Franco allegations because it was a very, very well-known, persistent talking point. I wouldn't even say rumor for years and years and years, nearly as long as James Franco has been around. And that's why I find it really difficult to believe when any of these Hollywood people say that they didn't know about one of their best friends' behavior when they've worked on multiple productions with them, and they are actually like friends with them in real life too. Ashton Kutcher and Danny Masterson, you know I always gotta mention my number one enemy, Ashton Kutcher, because it's not even like you or I. I'm sure that there are people out there that they have friends that, look, I work from home, I don't go to an office, and most of my friends do. Could one of my friends be an absolute monster at work that I don't know about because I'm not friends with any of their friends at work? They go to like a small office and don't have friends there. Absolutely, there could be. And I'm sure there's plenty of people that are accidentally friends with monsters that they are not aware of. But Hollywood isn't like that. Like it is kind of a small town in a way, and everybody knows everything, but also because you're involved at a much higher level than as an actor, you are going to hear things, you are going to be aware of things. And even when people are casting stuff, like they will throw people out for the most ridiculous reasons. Oh, I heard they were difficult on this, or I heard they did that on this. Like, I just don't think that that's possible. And also factoring in that it is Hollywood. If my friend's a monster when they're working at a bank, like I might hear about it if I'm in the Isle of Man where like everybody talks about everybody, but chances are it's not going to be all over the internet. There's not going to be allegations from women being posted on social media. You and I don't have teams of people who it is their literal job to know all of these things, to make you come across as the best person in the world, to know all the talking points, interviews, all of that stuff. And actors at the level of Seth Rogen and James Franco, it's not like they just have an agent, a manager, a lawyer, and one publicist. They have teams and teams of people. And then put on top of that, that both Franco and Rogen also have been producers, writers, directors for years and years and years. There are so many people behind them. So again, I want people to make up their own decision, factoring in everything that we've discussed, but I do find it very hard to believe. Do I know? Absolutely. Of course not. I wasn't there. I wasn't on these sets, so I don't know. But it is one of those things that I also think that it has been very, very moved on from. And it will be interesting to see what happens because James Franco has been trying to come back. And Seth Rogen is in this completely different realm now. And that leads me to like one of the other things that I want to discuss about kind of the controversial side of him is the stuff that Pamela Anderson has said about him. Because as I mentioned at the beginning, the last couple of years have been really, really strong for Seth Rogen. As I mentioned, The Boys, which I just think that's a great show, and The Studio, which is another great show. I highly recommend The Studio if you like in any way any of the stuff that we talk about here, because it's all about behind the scenes and movie execs and people like Catherine Hahn, like love her, and the late Catherine O'Hara was in it as well, and they say they're going to address that in the new season. Seth Rogen actually accepted the Golden Globe Emmy. Pretty sure now I'm double let me one second. Okay, I'm back. She was nominated for an Emmy and a Golden Globe and won an actor award, which is like the new name for Screen Actor Awards, the SAG Awards. And they also won the actor award for best ensemble. I was thinking of Emmy because they were nominated for, I think it was 23 Emmys, and they ended up winning 13, and they ended up winning Best Comedy, and Seth Rogen won for Best Actor. So they won a bunch of awards, basically. And it is a very, very lauded show in Hollywood and just in general. And a lot of Hollywood people really love it for multiple reasons. One, because it is quite true to behind the scenes, and even people at that like level where they would be speaking to executives, or even some executives themselves, have said, oh, this is very accurate. There's certain things that they've not parodied on the show, but that they've taken from their real life experiences. And of course, as I was saying, Hollywood is a very small town. So while the vast majority of the audience of the studio might not know the executive or whomever they're portraying, the actual name of that person and who it was, a lot of Hollywood people will know, because there's certain famous or infamous things that they've portrayed in the show, like a executive crying after the Golden Globes because they weren't thanked in the speech. And they talk about that a lot in the show, and there's an episode centered around it, because they're taking all these aspects from what they've experienced over the years. Seth Rogen has spoken in a lot of interviews about how he kind of has these projects that are very defining for a decade or so of his life. He spoke about how he wrote Superbad when he was in his 20s about his teens. And then in his 30s, he wrote Pineapple Express, which drew on a lot of experiences from his 20s after Freaks and Geeks and Undeclared, but before Superbad, when he had these few years of kind of unemployment. And now that he's in the upper echelon of Hollywood and has been dealing with all these people, all these years, producers and executives, he's writing about those experiences. But a lot of people in the industry also love this show because of how well it is made and how they shoot it. There are many situations in the show where they'll do oneers, which is no cuts, like you do one continuous shot, and they have an episode that is basically a oneer for the whole episode. The show Adolescence that came out on Netflix a couple of months ago, that was absolutely brilliant and got so much praise from the industry, but each episode is a oneer. They just shoot the entire episode. They don't have one cut, and so it's very, very difficult to do, especially in some of these scenes in the studio where they have so many extras and things like that. And one of the reasons that they're able to do that is because Apple does make these very, very high production shows that they have an endless money pit. So the shows don't have to make the money back. So they are shows like the studio Severance, Pluribus, that they give them as much time and everything that they need, because Apple TV is, I don't want to say like a fun side project for Apple, but they've got no shortage of cash. They're not someone who is like counting the $6 or $8.99 that it is to have Apple TV and then using that money only to make their shows. It's why all their shows are so incredible and stunning, and they do have this very high quality, because they don't have an endless supply of money on the shows, but they have a lot more money than most other productions. And The Boys, obviously, it depends what metric you're measuring it by, but it is Amazon's most successful show, or maybe by some people's measurements, one of the most successful shows. And it is always such a pop culture zeitgeist discussion when a new season comes out. And as I said, I'm filming this on the day the first 2 seasons are released. So I might taking on so many channels right now, because not taking on, I'm having fun doing it. I now have the Coffee and Cults cinematic universe with Coffee, Cults, and Cats, which is like short current event topics. So I might do a video over on there. I could do on my original channel, but I just think The Boys fits more on like a current event pop culture thing. And then I do have Coffee and Cults for Sleep, Chores, and More, which is like compilation videos of the videos here. So like all the WB videos, all the Scientology videos, that go on for hours and hours. Videos so long you'll never have to hear your own thoughts again. So I might do something with the boys on coffee, cults, and cats, but I'll leave the cinematic universe link down below. And some people might say, well, where's Miss G's channel? These are Miss G's channels. Like, I'm just the help, you know, that's the star back there. So she's on all of them, but she does have her own Instagram, which I'll leave linked down below too. So Seth Rogen does have all of these shows that he has a lot of praise, not only from audiences, from critics, from the studios, but also with the studio, Hollywood itself. And that's not just TV shows, like he does tons of movies and other productions still too. He's done stuff with the Muppets. Like he is so on fire with everything he's doing. He has something like 18 movies and shows in production right now. And it seems like definitely every month, maybe not quite every week, but definitely every month, there's some sort of Seth Rogen, Evan Goldberg production coming out. And while there is a lot of positivity towards his productions, there also has been criticism from within Hollywood over productions that he's done in the past few years. In 2022, he did Pam and Tommy, the Hulu show about Pamela Anderson and Tommy Lee's sex tape. And Pamela Anderson specifically asked, do not do this show. Please do not do this show. And he did it. And a lot of people will say, oh, well, that show portrayed her as the victim and, you know, they really were in her favor. And it just, I mean, that is just like the most insane thing, because it's like, yes, is portraying her as the victim of you. You are making the show that she's asked you not to. As someone who is talking about editing, writing, researching, or working on something that's talking about most likely celebrities, okay, occasionally there's stuff like Elizabeth Holmes or Ocean Gate and stuff like that, but the vast majority of what I do every single minute of the day is talk about celebrity stuff. And the kind of agreement is, you're in the public eye, you know, there's kind of open discussion on your work. Of course, there are, you know, I don't talk about kids. I don't talk about these things that people are, I don't want this spoken about. I don't really talk about people that they haven't had some sort of controversy or stuff like that. And even if I do, like with Mary-Kate and Ashley, I spoke about the exploitation of them, but I'm not deep diving like their life now, because they've been very clear, like outside of what they do fashion wise and stuff like that, like they don't want people deep diving their life. And as I said, I'm not in any way, shape, or form comparing Seth Rogen, like multi-millionaire and winning every award and masses and masses of success, and the YouTube videos I make. But I think about topics that I have not covered because I have seen people say like, oh, I don't want this discussed, or like the Mary-Kate and Ashley thing that I was saying. But would those maybe be different decisions if there was like horrendous allegations from someone, or they were convicted of something horrible? Like, I have a different line for Mary-Kate and Ashley that were exploited their entire childhood, and the line for Danny Masterson, and even the line for Ashton Kutcher and people like that. But with Pamela Anderson, there's absolutely there's criticism there, but I'm just looking at it from the standpoint of, this was something that was done to her. She was the victim, as pretty much everybody seems to agree. And Seth Rogen did something that she had explicitly said, please do not do this, because not only does it go over everything again, it brings everything up. And it's like what I said about Mary-Kate and Ashley again in that video, is I'm sure the biggest factor in them not going back to Full House is that it opens that door again. And no matter what, like, it brings it all up in the press, it brings it up in the interview circuits, it puts a huge spotlight on all of it again. And not only is it the Hulu show Pam and Tommy in isolation, but it's bringing just all of that into the limelight again. And Pamela Anderson spoke in an interview recently about being at award shows and Seth Rogen, being very close to her and in the vicinity, and how he's never apologized or never said anything to her about it. And I think the quote that she was saying was that she just felt really like icky when she was around him because he just, was acting like she didn't exist, or like there was no any sort of history there. And he produced it and everything like that. And he also appeared in the series as the person who stole the tape. And Pam and Tommy and the interview, I just think about it again. I'm ADHD, like I'm putting it into my own little realm of where I operate. And I just think like when there's a topic that I look at and think, oh, I could cover this, but maybe I shouldn't, like it involves their kids too much or something like that. Or there's plenty of times that I look into topics and I'm like, this isn't going to make a good video, or I can't make a good thumbnail or title out of this because like I do that before I really, I deep dive the topic to make sure it can be good. But unfortunately on YouTube, packaging is a factor because it doesn't matter if you make the best video in the world. If no one clicks on it, no one sees it. I wish that thumbnails and all of that weren't part of it. I wish the video could just stand alone. But unfortunately, that's not how the platform operates, and you have to play in the game. But there have absolutely been moments where it hasn't just been topics that I've thought, oh, this would be amazing to do, but better not after I've heard something or looked into some aspect of it. But there's also been moments where I found clips and things like that that I'm like, oh, this is really good. Like, this is really, something people are going to be so interested in, or even clips that are really salacious. But what ends up happening a lot of the time with very salacious clips, or even just quotes that I'm reading somewhere, when I go and seek out the primary source, which I will always do, unless it's it's been taken down or something like that. And then I will always caveat it by, I haven't been able to find the primary source on this. But when I do that, I then will find that there's surrounding quotes or surrounding context that completely not nullifies what they say, but it really changes it and doesn't make it salacious or doesn't make it as interesting. And of course, you always have to do the right thing, or you should do the right thing. I look at that stuff that I say, no, I'm not going to do that. And I have a million other things. Like, I could make these videos every day for the rest of my life and not run out of topics. And Seth Rogen, there's so many other things that you could do than Pam and Tommy. Was that like changing the world? Was there's something that really needed to be said there? And it's kind of the same with the interview. Like, was it a movie that I'm sure a lot of people enjoyed and thought was funny and all of that? But was it something that was absolutely needed to be made? I guess that's like the question that only everybody can answer individually. And the same thing with, what do you think about Seth Rogen's culpability in all of the James Franco stuff? It's either he was completely blindsided and had no idea, which is the impression that's pushed out by him and his team. It's somewhere in the middle where he knew something or knew stuff but turned a blind eye, or it's he knew everything and just turned a blind eye, didn't care because it was making a lot of money, making successful projects, and he liked, to whatever extent that is, working with James Franco, their friendship, whatever. So I am very interested to hear what people think, because I know this video is kind of different in the sense that it's not really a clear conclusion of this is exactly what happened, because we don't know what happened behind the scenes. Have a good guess, but I absolutely wasn't there, so I can't say 100%. So I'm really interested to hear what people think, because I feel like Seth Rogen is, again, just my judgment on being so chronically involved in pop culture and stuff, is that he falls into these kind of two extremes of like people really love him or they don't like him at all. So I'm very interested to hear what you guys think. If you made it to the end, leave MVP below so I can thank you for watching. As I said, G and I now have the Coffee and Cult cinematic universe. We have some new Miss G merch, lots of different designs. I'll leave link down below. Link down below, as always, is G and I's social media, Patreon, merch, sources, everything you could possibly need. As always, thank you so much for watching. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate it. Make sure to stay safe, take care of yourselves, and G and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye, guys.